Corporation drives national productivity. Do you know that the economic development of a country is vital for the well-being of the people? Did you know that productivity growth can spur such economic expansion? The Malaysia Productivity Corporation, MPC, a statutory body under the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, has been mandated to ensure increased country productivity and competitiveness. The Malaysia Productivity Blueprint is the primary guide to the effort. MPC actively works with regulators and industry players to assist in formulating quality public policy. The National Policy on Good Regulatory Practice has been launched to produce excellent and effective policies and regulations. A business-friendly environment will boost the country's economy. Through the MUDA program, MPC strengthens the business ecosystem and reduces the unnecessary regulatory burdens. The transparency of regulatory compliance information is also made available through the MyGaris Panduan portal. In addition, the Unified Public Consultation Platform ensures that all stakeholders have the opportunity to provide input on the rulemaking process. MPC leads the implementation of the Agile regulations. The E10 program in Kulim has successfully accelerated the construction of industrial, commercial, and residential buildings. The IUJKT program has accelerated land conversion in Kedah through digitalization. The success of E10 and IUJKT initiatives have encouraged foreign and domestic investors to start businesses and has created thousands of jobs for the people. 11 Productivity Nexus is the country's critical economic subsectors play a role in increasing productivity through industrial solutions. Various industry challenges have been successfully addressed in collaboration with the public and private sectors. Emphasis is also placed on the adoption of technology, research and development, and effective incentives. Talent is an essential factor in economic growth. Through the Academy in Factory program, the workforce is channeled into more productive sectors and increases employee productivity. The innovation of this program allows employees to learn and add skills while working. MPC also recognizes employees who contribute to increased productivity as productivity champions. MPC has developed a National Behavioral Insights program. MPC also develops the competencies of civil servants in applying behavioral insights in formulating policies. A framework for the implementation of the Behavioral Insights Initiative was successfully produced. Since its inception, improving productivity at the firm level has always been a top plan of MPC. As a result, many successes in transforming firms to more competitive levels have been achieved. More significant efforts, the Productive Enterprises Program and the Productivity in Context, are being implemented to benefit all firms in Malaysia. MPC also actively collaborates with various organizations such as the World Bank, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the Asia Productivity Organization, and the Australian Government Productivity Commission internationally. The good practices of developed countries are implemented in Malaysia. MPC drives national productivity for economic growth and the well-being of the people.
MPC is highly committed to increase productivity of our fellow Malaysians and our beloved country, Malaysia.
Assalamualaikum, salam bahagia and good afternoon, as well as welcome to the National Conference on Behavioural Insights 2022, organised by Malaysia Productivity Corporation, MPC. First off, I would like to welcome our honourable guest, Datuk Lokman Hakim Ali, the Secretary General of Ministry of International Trade and Industry, representing Tan Sri Muhammad Zuki Ali, the Chief Secretary for the Government of Malaysia. And also I would like to welcome Datuk Abdul Latif Abusman, the Director General of MPC. Ladies and gentlemen, this is another edition of National Conference on Behavioural Insights. In the previous series, MPC, as the custodian of BI practices in Malaysia, has garnered huge development from one milestone to another in advancing behavioural insights as a tool in helping administrators and regulators to gauge sentiment and also to introduce better policies. And all this despite an episode of a hiatus a 2 years somewhat disruptive event of COVID-19. Nevertheless, Malaysia has been growing strong. We are moving forward. And in this year's episode of National Conference on BI, MPC is focusing on imbuing more value to administrators and regulators to adopt BI as a practice. Now, to give more insights on this year's event, I would like to invite Yang Berbahagia Dato' Abdul Latif Abusman, the Director General of MPC, to deliver his welcoming remarks. Please welcome Dato' Abdul Latif.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Seri Muhammad Zuki Ali, Chief Secretary to the Government of Malaysia. Yang berbahagia Datuk Lokman Hakim Ali, Secretary General, Ministry of International Trade and Industry. Eminent speakers, senior government officers, captains of industry, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera and a good afternoon. Malaysia Productivity Corporation welcomes all the attendees to the National Conference on Behavioural Insights 2022 theme, Mainstream Behavioural Insights for Better Policy. Our heartiest gratitude to Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Seri Muhammad Zuki Ali, Yang Berbahagia Datuk Lokman Hakim Ali, and the eminent speakers for taking some time to share invaluable insights on the application of behavioural insights, or BI in short, in public policy. Ladies and gentlemen, under the 12th Malaysia Plan, 12 MP, Malaysia's government focuses on enhancing quality decision-making and encouraging innovation to strengthen public service delivery. In line with the evidence-based policy-making and whole-of-government approach, the government emphasizes the application of behavioural insights in developing and implementing quality policies and regulations. If I may quote directly from the 12th Malaysia Plan, the BI approach will be adopted as a complementary tool to enhance the government's services to the rakyat. BI will be used to design and implement policies to guide the rakyat towards making better decisions. The application of BI in the public sector will be introduced in the 12th Malaysia Plan through several initiatives by Malaysia Productivity Corporation. So MPC is committed to spearheading BI initiative as mandated by the 12th MP, as I had mentioned earlier, which I quoted under the 12th Malaysia Plan, to enhance productivity and competitiveness using this BI approach. Today's conference hopes to increase awareness and understanding of embedding BI in designing better policies and regulations and build the capacity of policymakers and regulators to apply BI in public policy. BI application in policy making has proven to enhance public compliance, reduce compliance costs, improve policy outcomes, and increase productivity. Implementing BI optimizes the use of resources and minimizes enforcement as people are more willing to comply with rules and regulations. As BI employs problem solving through tested interventions, it builds the foundation for evidence-based governance. According to the Economic for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, 202 institutions worldwide have applied BI to public policy. Ladies and gentlemen, in the duration of the 12th Malaysia Plan, MPC had set in motion several strategic initiatives to drive the adoption of BI. In addition to the outreach and awareness programs, through conferences, seminars and webinars, to engage with policymakers and regulators, MPC is developing BI case studies through collaboration with various ministries and government agencies to develop a competent and experienced pool of local experts in BI. BI case studies will be published as references for practitioners in the public sector. This year, MPC, in collaboration with various ministries and government agencies, is completing 5 case studies, among others, to improve Strategic Trade Act, or in short STA 2010 compliance, nudging merchants and consumers at Pasar Tani using digital payment, and encourage private education institutions to be registered at Ministry of Education. Capacity building programs to train and encourage government officers' active participation in BI activities are ongoing and will be amplified in the near future. MPC is also developing an evaluation mechanism to measure the effectiveness of BI in policy making. Until November this year, MPC has trained more than 200 government officers. Government servants are welcome to access MPC's My Latihan Maya portal for modules and micro-learning videos on BI. Ladies and gentlemen, the National Behavioural Insights Guidelines, a reference to guide regulators, policymakers and practitioners at the national, state and local authority levels in applying BI as a policy and productivity tool, is now ready. The guidelines establish the PRIME framework, or PRIME, PRIME framework, to equip policymakers with simple processes, design strategies and methods for implementing BI. PRIME, which is short for purpose, review, intervention, measure and expand, identifies policy goals, objective, behavioral issues and target groups, analyzes behavioral gaps and their context, strategizes interventions to achieve outcomes, tracks intervention results, and scales up interventions to a broader audience. The National BI Guidelines also serve as a repository of BI best practices, proof of concepts, methodological standards, and a reference for ethical principles and concerns in implementing BI. Ladies and gentlemen, we will hear more about BI from our speakers today. Today's conference provides an opportunity for policymakers and BI practitioners to discuss mainstreaming the application of BI within the government and explore innovative ways to address complex policy problems. Thank you for your presence, and let us have a productive conference. Continue to stay safe, continue to stay healthy, and continue to be productive. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Dr. Abdul Latif Abusman, the Director General of MPC, for the welcoming remark. And we hope that under the newly elected government of Malaysia, MPC will spur more innovative efforts in boosting our national productivity, inshallah. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is now time for the official address. I would like to invite our honorable guest, Dr. Lokman Hakim Ali, Secretary General, Ministry of International Trade and Industry, representing Tan Sri Muhammad Zuki Ali, the Chief Secretary for the Government of Malaysia, to deliver opening speech and subsequently officially opening the National Conference on Behavioural Insights 2022. Please welcome Datuk Lokman Hakim Ali.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang berbahagia Datuk Abdul Latif bin Haji Abusman, Director General Malaysia Productivity Corporation. Yang berbahagia Tan Sri, Datuk Sri, Datuk, Datin, our distinguished speakers, panelists, moderator, and ladies and gentlemen. Alhamdulillah, all grace be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With His mercy, we are able to gather here this afternoon for this national conference on Behavioural Insights 2022 with its theme of Mainstreaming Behavioural Insights for Better Policy. I would like to express on behalf of Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Sri Muhammad Zuki Ali, the Chief Secretary to the Government, his gratitude and appreciation to Malaysia Productivity Corporation for having invited Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri to present the keynote address of this conference. I wish to convey Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri's sincere apologies for not being able to be here with us today. Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri had entrusted me to deliver his opening remarks on his behalf to all attendees and audience of this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I must congratulate MPC for their initiative in organizing this important national conference on Behavioural Insights 2022. I am confident that from this conference, we will learn much about behavioural insights approach and most importantly, obtain invaluable insights into how policymakers applied behavioral insights to shape intended policy outcomes. Our Prime Minister, Yang Amat Berhad Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, had emphasized that civil servants must uphold the reformative spirit in order to bring about changes for a better Malaysia. In line with this, our newly formed federal government leadership is expected to unveil and drive a reform agenda against the backdrop of global challenges, post-COVID-19 pandemic, and international tensions and conflicts that are impending trade and socio-economic progress. Notwithstanding the global situation, we know that the Rakyat expects the civil service to formulate and implement efficient and effective policies that will be beneficial to all citizens in their work and day-to-day living. The Rakyat, be it businesses, families, or individuals, should not be burdened with policies that are cumbersome or too costly for them to comply with. Non-compliable policies are inherently self-defeating. Certain governmental policies, however, do not achieve or only partially achieve their targeted outcomes. A common reason for the shortfall can be due to the lack of provisional understanding prior to the implementation of policies on how the Rakyat will behave in response to implemented policies. In seeking to change people's behaviors, first and foremost, we must try to understand why people are behaving in a certain way. This prerequisite is critical when policies are being designed or modified. Being able to predict how people will behave when the government implements a policy through the use of behavioral insights to test out proposed policies before implementation will help provide economically efficient public services to the Rakyat with greater positive impact and less wastage of resources and time. Behavioral insights calls for a new mindset and a new set of skills in public policy making. Ladies and gentlemen, Malaysia's next stage of national socio-economic transformation and progress will depend greatly on efficiency, productivity, and technological advancement. Behavioral insights-based public policies will drive towards transformation and progress. Behavioral insights is applicable in a very wide range of fields wherever changes in behaviors are sought such as healthcare, education, industries, urban traffic management, transportation, natural resources sustainability, and the environment. The 12th Malaysia Plan 2021 to 2025 has highlighted behavioral insights as a complementary tool to be applied so as to have more effective public policy formulation, implementation, and review. Underlining the great importance placed on it by the Government of Malaysia, behavioral insights is embedded in the National Policy for Good Regulatory Practice (NPGRP) 2021 that encourages regulators to use behavioral insights as a tool to facilitate the development, evaluation, and iteration of policy options. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I'm very pleased to be here with all of you in this conference, and I urge you to give your fullest support to MPC in realizing behavioral insights initiatives. Each ministry should champion behavioral insights initiative through One Ministry, One Behavioral Insight project. All civil servants, both at the federal as well as the state levels, should understand the need for behavioral insights. The time to start learning this science is now. Our conference held today is highly significant and a meaningful milestone in the never-ending journey of the civil service to have the public sector working together closely with the private sector for a better Malaysia. With that, I hereby declare open the National Conference on Behavioural Insights 2022 and launch the National Behavioural Insights Guideline. Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Behavioural insights understanding, and nudging behavior towards better policy and public administration. Experts have been studying a novel policy approach of nudging consumers' behavior, helping people making better choices for themselves and the public at large. For more than 10 years, this crossbreed of psychology, social science and cognitive approach of policy administration had run through rigorous empirically tested research. It has now been further developed and serves as a way to nudge the public into making better decisions. Behavioral insights guidelines aimed at helping regulators to use behavioral insights tools, approaching issues, gauging need and introducing measures for policy intervention. Facilitating government at all levels, national, state and local, alike, on various issues ranging from regulation, consumption, conservation, environment and resource allocation. Behavioral Insights Guideline and Behavioral Insights Handbook for Regulators helps the nation to better understand the need of the citizen, while nudging the country to higher productivity and a better future.
On behalf of the organizer, I'd like to thank Datuk Lokman Hakim Ali, the Secretary General of Ministry of International Trade and Industry, representing Tan Sri Muhammad Zuki Ali, the Chief Secretary for the Government of Malaysia, in officially opening our National Conference on Behavioural Insights this year. And in the opening speech, Datuk Lokman Hakim Ali mentioned One Ministry, One Behavioural Insight Project campaign, which I believe will indeed lend more weight for the adoption of BI tools among regulators and administrators across the country. We will now set the scene for our conference and moving on to presentation from our panel experts. And our first presenter is Mr. James Drummond, Lead Policy Analyst of OECD. Hello, James. Welcome to the conference.
Hello, everybody. Good morning from Paris, and of course, good afternoon to everyone over in Malaysia. I'm just going to open my slides right now, and as I do, I just want to take this moment, first of all, to thank sincerely the opportunity to be here today, and of course to thank Datuk Lokman and of course Datuk Latif, and of course everybody at both MITI and the MPC for this opportunity to be here today. I'm trying to get my slides up at the same time. 1 second.
I didn't get a chance to introduce you, James.
Oh, please, sorry, go ahead.
Nevertheless, I can do that later, maybe. Or I'll just do it now, if you don't mind, yeah.
Please,
so
go
just
ahead.
A bit of background. James is currently the Lead Policy Analyst of OECD, and he's an expert in drafting analytical skills with 7 years experience working at OECD, and he has written and also contributed more than 15 publications on green governance for the OECD. He has also extensive experience supporting the organizational change and reform. And currently, his work requires him to support regulatory policy, committee, and economic regulators. And with his vast experience across diverse administrative systems all over the world, I think James is one of the most sought-after experts in terms of BI implementation. So now, James, is the time for you to present.
Thank you very much for that, and sorry for the little misstep there. It is quite early here in Paris, and I'm still a little bit waking up. So thank you very much for that warm introduction, and again, really appreciate being here today, and really appreciate this opportunity from my great colleagues over in Malaysia. As has been mentioned a few times already, the OECD considers itself really great partners with Malaysia, and especially with both MITI and the MPC. We work very closely with you all, and it's really a pleasure and an honor to be here today. And it's also an honor to be able to, of course, share the floor with FAISAL NARU, who's also a leader in this, and of course led a lot of the work here at the OECD, and I'm only honored to be able to continue his legacy here. And so my job here today is to speak to you about our work on behavioral insights, and especially focus on some of our most recent work, which is on using behavioral insights to support reforms and fast-paced decision-making. And so as I begin here, just wanted to show a quick slide. It's a bit of a heavy slide, but just a bit of a context of sort of how do we arrive at this information and how do we generate this knowledge? Well, in that very generous introduction, it was mentioned that I serve policy communities, starting with the Regulatory Policy Committee and also the Network of Economic Regulators, which are actually meeting today. So this is why I'm going to have to unfortunately leave after this panel session to go to some meetings. But these are senior better regulation officials from across the OECD and also partner countries that actually MPC attends as well as a delegates from Malaysia. But then we have other networks such as the ASEAN OECD Good Regulatory Practices Network, which Malaysia also co-chairs, and of course the OECD BI Experts Network, which are also sort of networks of senior officials from these policy areas. And through these committees and networks, we get together and we meet to exchange ideas and generate solutions that will help everybody try to make better policies for better lives, as well as set standards and guidance for the best practices to follow. And through that, we then help countries with advice and support for implementing those standards, guidance, and ideas in practice. And so just after that sort of brief introduction, I just wanted to sort of note that for the next, I guess, about 25 minutes or so, I'll talk about three sort of broad themes. First of all, I'll introduce this theme of OECD's work applied on applying BI to government, and then dive into sort of two aspects of that I think are quite relevant to today's conversation. First of all, BI for fast-paced decision-making, and then preparing the government using, for the next crisis using BI. So starting a bit on the sort of general OECD work on BI applied to government. There would normally be animations on this, so apologies if it's a little bit scrunched up. But our perspective, maybe just taking a quick step back, our perspective on the usefulness of behavior change to regulation is that regulation fundamentally involves behavior change. And what do I mean about this? Well, on the slide, you'll see I have two categories here. Regulation fundamentally asks people to either start doing something or stop doing something. And on the top row, on the start doing something side, you'll see a famous photo from building the Empire State Building in New York City, where you see workers at height eating their lunches. If one falls, unfortunately, there's going to be quite catastrophic consequences. And safety regulation over the last 70, 80 years has now encouraged people to wear lots of protective gear, harnesses, hard hats, etc., to help make working at height much safer. And on the bottom side, you see about stop doing something. Here, I think you see an overly dramatic photo, maybe edited to make it look worse than it is. But you see on the left-hand side a smokestack with quite black smoke to kind of make the image of climate change or of pollution, rather. And of course, regulation has required factories to install scrubbers to help make that smoke less black, more white, and thus less polluting. And in both of these cases, it's about asking people to stop doing what they were currently doing, either what they weren't doing or what they were doing, and have them change their behavior to something new. However, we know that behavior change is very hard. And we have the basic framework, which is our framework for applying behavioral insights to public policy that we released in 2019, that has the ABCD of behavioral insights. This is our simple framework to try to understand the various ways that behavioral insights, that behavioral barriers and biases can create difficulties in behavior change. There's, for instance, this problem of attention. It's very difficult to pay attention to everything we need to pay attention to in life, and sometimes we miss important things, like this unfortunate fellow who's missed his train. Sometimes we form a belief that might be counteractive to the goals that we're trying to promote. Here we have a car speeding faster than the speed limit. Sometimes the choice architecture or the number of choices that were presented lead us to making suboptimal choices, and then we end up regretting the choice that we make in the end. And then even if you get through issues of attention, belief formation, and choice, you have sometimes issue of determination, sticking to those choices over time. And here you have a gym subscription where nobody's using it, which I think, unfortunately, many of us have experienced. And so I've made the case that regulation requires behavior change, and behavior change is difficult. And this is where BI has been a mainstay of our program of work for quite some time, almost a decade at this point. And the point I'm trying to make with this slide here is that not to just brag about the number of publications we have, that's not the point at all, but just to really show the evolution of the program of work. We started, like many, on looking at the ways that we can improve policy outcomes for individuals using behavioral insights. But then we realized in that process that as part of regulatory policy, you have a number of firms and organizations, the regulated entities, that also need behavior change. And so we started applying BI more to organizations. And then through that, we realized, well, the missing piece of the puzzle is government as well. Government is an organization, government is full of individuals, and there's definitely ways that BI can be applied to government. And that's our latest program of work. And so today, that is what my presentation will land on, is these two papers that we produced in 2020 and 2021 on BI applied to government, with the question mark of, can it be used to help create a modern, agile, and fast-paced decision-making system inside government? And so I'll go through these two papers now in my final two sections. So starting with the BI for fast-paced decision-making. As has been mentioned already, of course, COVID impacted our societies greatly and impacted the way government operates greatly. And this was something that the BI community saw right away, that when we entered, obviously, lockdowns and the pandemic, the government was looking for a number of different ways to try to address the fast-changing situation. And one of them was through behavior change. So, of course, we needed widespread behavior change almost immediately in our countries across the world. However, behavioral scientists in governments around the world were a bit concerned because they wanted to be involved in this, but they were finding some difficulties getting involved. And so starting in March 2020, right at the very start of the pandemic, some members of the BI community approached the OECD to help support the creation of the International COVID-19 BI and Policy Group. And this was a group of behavioral practitioners and policymakers in governments around the world that met monthly to collaborate and exchange ideas, resources, findings, and approaches to help both explore those findings and how they can learn from each other, but also provide urgent targeted advice. Frequently, members would come to the meeting saying, I'm having an issue right now. Can someone help me sort of address this issue? And out of that came this paper on regulatory policy and COVID-19 BI for fast-paced decision-making. And the origins of this paper were that we realized that, again, BI expertise was a bit divorced from the policy responses in some countries. We wanted to investigate why. And of course, the pandemic itself, as I mentioned, required fast-paced and sort of widespread behavior change. This is not an image by us. This is by a couple behavioral public health officials and scientists in the UK, where they mapped the way that the virus transmits itself. That's the white bubbles, all the different ways the virus sort of transmits from person to person. And all the colorful boxes are ways that behavior can interrupt these transmission chains, with the idea that if you can use behavior to disrupt the transmission chains, you can now slow the pace of the pandemic. So there was clear need for behavior change, and there was behavior expertise in governments around the world, but wasn't able to input into the decision-making process. And of course, the map of 2018 has been mentioned already, where we produced a map in 2018 of behavioral science units around the world. And this is actually the next iteration of it. This is from my colleagues in the Observatory for Public Sector Innovation, who have a living map of BI institutions around the world, where countries can submit in real time their unit for addition to the map. So it's constantly being updated. And you can see here the effects of that, because especially there's many more units in the global, which is really amazing to see. And so there clearly is a lot of BI expertise around the world. However, they were experiencing many challenges from a governance perspective of inputting into the pandemic response. And we found four broad categories of challenges they were experiencing. First was on a bit of a role clarity and expectation management side. That there was, of course, as I said, behavioral expertise located across governments, but they were in many different institutional forms, structures, and locations. They weren't all the same. There are some that are at the center of government, there are some that are at the center of departments, and there are some that are just being used by policy officials at sort of almost an ad hoc level. And the challenge here was that they're not always aligned with the decision-making structures of the pandemic. Quite often, those decision-making structures were centralized into the very center. And if you were not in the BI units in the center, you felt quite difficulty accessing that sort of decision-making structure and providing the right advice. Second was the financial and human resources available to these units. These units were not all public health experts. Many were behavioral finance or behavioral economics experts. And so themselves were having difficulty always having the right advice from a public health perspective. And even when they were asked for advice, if they needed to go find the answer or find the right expert, the system of procurement or expert access did not always allow the sort of quick access to the information governments needed. Third was the process for generating this evidence when they were requested to generate evidence. Now, there was a pre-pandemic trend away from randomized controlled trials as being the only way to do behavioral insights. There was, many units around the world are adopting more rapid and iterative methods to try to, get to solutions a bit faster. And this definitely continued into the pandemic. It was definitely the way that many units approached BI during the pandemic. But still, even that rapid method was often too slow for governments who needed answers now. And so the challenge was providing that advice when we don't necessarily know what works. They're asking us, can you tell us from a behavioral perspective how to address this policy problem, but we don't have evidence to tell them. And then finally, communicating outputs and outcomes. Of course, lack of time and sometimes lack of permission meant that governments were not always sharing what they were doing. And that created difficulties in mutual learning, especially identifying what did not work so that we don't repeat things that are not working, and thus affecting the trust of governments, so the trust of citizens in our government solutions. And so as an outcome of this paper, we also included several case studies on the way that countries were trying to tackle these challenges as sort of an optimistic way forward, and also included discussions of the community members in that paper. I do have to caution, of course, that paper reflects the early stages of the pandemic. And so there is a bias towards the early stages of the pandemic. However, I think some of the messages still persist today. And there are three major findings that come out of that. First, that a large number of the ways that behavioral scientists contributed to the response was through improving the health communications or the technology being used to help track and trace people and the transmission of the disease. Now, that might reflect, again, that sort of lag about where they sort of contributed to. But I think one of the persisting effects of that has been the use of behavioral science largely in that sort of communication or building technology phase. And that leads to the second message, where the community was a bit concerned about this, because they have their skills that are far beyond just being, your behavioral communication or improving app design. And they were worried that this was setting a bit unwanted precedences, especially in regards to sort of the way they provide sort of this rapid testing and advice. And members noted the variety of ways that they can sort of contribute to many of the different ways that government respond to crises going forward, including things like mental health, economic recovery, green recovery, etc. And I mean, really, I think what comes from that paper is a need and a call for further research into the governance of BI units, so that we can understand the different construction of units and the way those units contribute to the way that governments can utilize that resource in times of crisis, but also just in general policymaking. And I can tell you that that is one of our next programs of work going forward. So with that sort of on the fast-paced side, identifying some of the sort of challenges that government faced and maybe some of the solutions about doing some research in the end, moving on to another possible solution, which is even taking a step further back and saying, can BI be used to prepare government for the next crisis, especially from a reform perspective? And so on the slide here, I have to you a very simple sort of argument that government reforms often underperform. And why is that? Is sort of the key question that comes to the slide. Well, if you look at the sort of simple diagram I've made here, the intention is for public sector reforms to generate better public policy. And these reforms, especially lately, have been often on evidence-based policymaking, such as the use of behavioral insights, modernizing government to be more agile and responsive. In the regulatory policy space, this often manifests itself as well in the good regulatory practices, improved oversight, use of digital tools, use of behavioral insights, more from there. However, successive OECD regulatory policy outlooks, which is our flagship publication where we track the use of better regulation around the world every 3 years, has come to the conclusion that still regulatory management tools and these reforms are underdeveloped, insufficiently implemented, or just not demonstrating the expected results. And the big question on the market on the slide there is why? Why is this? And we believe that there is at least probably an element of behavioral change involved there that's not being addressed through the reforms. And if I take that sort of diagram and kind of focus it on what we know about behavioral insights and where we know behavioral insights is being applied. Well, again, on the left, we have the regulatory governance reforms where public institutions, processes and tools, and they are used to, improve regulatory decisions. Well, BI is mostly applied on the right-hand side to improving regulatory decisions, often to the late design and delivery of regulations, and really with an implementation and individual focus. And that's good. I mean, we have a large amount of evidence that has generated, and a large amount of really good evidence that's generated. But it's also created a bit of an imbalance because there is many new frontiers to applying behavioral insights to the actual reforms itself, to the way policy is made, such that if you can improve the way policy is made from a behavioral perspective, theoretically all decisions, not just those that are behaviorally informed through the use of behavioral insights, can be improved. And so the program of work that we're working on right now is creating a bridge between those two sides and applying lessons that we have learned to organizations, not just individuals, and to policymakers and regulators, not just citizens and firms. And the framework that we're using for this, to conceptualize this, is what's called behavioral public choice, which comes from academic literature, which basically says that government is created and run by humans who experience the same biases and barriers as anyone else. My video feed just dropped. Okay, it's back. I just want to make sure I'm still here. Okay, I think I am. Moving on. So what we did was we produced a paper last year called Behavioral Insights and Regulatory Governance, Opportunities and Challenges, that sought to both expand that model I just discussed, as well as investigate it, try to identify some of these barriers and biases that might be affecting reforms, and see if there's some possible solutions that we can explore. It looks at these institutions, tools, and processes that comprise what we call regulatory governance, and it was developed through the OECD Regulatory Policy Committee, through interviews and collaboration with them. And again, just to set expectations, it is an initial mapping. The ideas are meant to generate, further investigation and testing. And you might be asking, James, come on, organizations are different than individuals. Can we really do this? And we think yes. And this comes back to our very first entry point into BI applied to organizations, where we worked with a behavioral scientist named Laurie Foster back in 2017 to identify some of these theoretical ways that BI can be applied to organizations. And one of the arguments of the paper that she wrote for us was that while the location of decision-making is definitely different, choice-making in organizations is still fundamentally the same in many situations. And where choice-making looks like more individual style, traditional behavioral insights, ones that we've learned from the individual side, may be able to apply. But of course, we have to recognize that there are group-style choice-making situations, and we need to explore different behaviorally informed methods there. The ultimate argument is that the people make the place, and it's less about influencing individuals versus organizational behavior and more about influencing organizations via the people, and particularly identifying the right people who encourage change and identifying the right policies and procedures that people follow to also help spur change. And through that paper, we identified a number of different barriers that if we can sort of raise them and sort of let them off, that we can help sort of improve the way that reforms are implemented. Starting at the top, of course, I think one of the obvious ones is getting through barriers of groupthink, where people are so used to doing things a certain way, and they're all convinced that that is the best way to be doing things, that implementing these reforms, introducing new reforms to them can sometimes challenge that sort of groupthink mentality. Second is risk and loss aversion, where sometimes these reforms, or often these reforms, introduce things like transparency and accountability through stakeholder engagement or further scrutiny of regulatory impact assessments or the use of behavioral insights. And that can be quite challenging for many public servants who are a bit concerned about some of the risks and some of the losses that they could experience, especially if they have to go into society and experience maybe sometimes anti-government bias through these reforms. And so breaking through some of these barriers will be important. Third is the position in government, that often reforms are created quite centrally, or at least with agencies that have close ties to the center. They've been given a mandate to create and implement these reforms. So they've been working on them and they've been thinking that these are really good. They're going to really solve government issues. But those who are receiving the reforms have not been so socialized to it, and they might be not experiencing the same level of enthusiasm to the reform. Of course, there are also time pressures involved, where governments need to make decisions very quickly, and sometimes the behavioral advice or the reform or the evidence generated by the reforms don't fit the policy cycle completely. And then from there, you also have maybe an over and underestimation of what is the best way to go about this. So sorry, my slides are very small, so I can't really see the point there. Thank you very much. Overestimate ideas. This kind of relates to that position in government argument, where again, when you work on something and you're convinced that regulatory impact assessments or the use of behavioral insights is the very best way forward, you might be overestimating what outcome that reform will generate. But again, those receiving it might be underestimating, might be saying, "Oh, this is a really weird new tool, and I'm not really sure about this one." So they might not be really open and sort of available to accepting that reform right away. This also might run into issues of sort of confirmation and availability bias, where they might look at these reforms, might look at maybe one or two early failures or lack of sort of optimal results and say, well, see, that proves that this does not work. I knew it wasn't going to work, and see, it proves it. And that sort of confirms their own priors of that tool. And so trying to figure out ways to sort of head that off will be important reforms. And then lastly, there's assumptions about others. People might assume that others are not using the tool. Why should I use the tool? It's a lot of work to adopt this new way of working, and others are clearly not doing it, so I'm not going to do it. And there's also issues there of personal autonomy. People might not have the personal autonomy to act, and they might not feel that they can personally adopt the reform, so why kind of do it? And so this is just, again, sort of a broad mapping, some ideas. And the paper ends with some ideas for sort of implementing these findings going forward. And this is my last slide, so I think I'm right kind of on the edge of my time. But it sort of identified three broad areas. First was to test these sort of common behavioral solutions. So I mentioned we learned a lot about individuals and the way BI applies to them, and we can make that bridge. How about we start testing those solutions and sort of rapidly test them to see if they work or if they don't work. And I think that's especially for the oversight bodies who are trying to sort of push these reforms. That would be a sort of a really good starting point. I think a little bit further into the future, and actually something that I'm really focusing on sort of right now, is exploring sort of BI applied to regulatory economics. A lot of the foundations of these sort of evidence-based reforms, and especially in regulatory policy, is in economics, such as introducing cost-benefit analysis via the regulatory impact assessment. And I think that could benefit from a bit of a behavioral economics critique of some of these sort of regulatory economics perspectives, and sort of maybe illuminate some additional barriers and challenges there. And then finally, sort of fostering greater understanding of BI applied to regulatory governance. What I mentioned is not holistic. It doesn't mention all the challenges and possible solutions. There's definitely more to discover. So I think more work has to be done there. And so I lied, that's one more quick slide. So as some final sort of concluding thoughts to take away from my presentation, 4 kind of major thoughts. First, that, again, regulation is fundamentally about behavior change, which makes conferences like this so incredibly important, because we need to really identify the way that, we can know more about human behavior, biases and barriers, and implement that to policymaking. There's also a growing body of evidence that BI can be and is very useful for organizations, including governments. So we need to start using that in government. And that crisis definitely identified that can be a bit difficult at times, especially when decision-making is restricted. And mobilizing BI expertise requires the alignment of roles, resources, processes, and learning. And it's easier to resolve issues of this before a crisis than during a crisis. That was quite clear from COVID. And that reforms often underperform expectations, often maybe due to barriers and biases, and that creates a really good opportunity to investigate that further to help improve reforms broadly in the public sector. So with that, I want to thank again very much for this opportunity to be here. My colleagues at MPC, it's really an honor, and to all the participants for being here today. Thank you again, and I look forward to any questions.
Yes, since James is going to leave early, so perhaps maybe we can take a few questions now, James, rather than later. There is
I can stay to the end of Faisal's intervention if you want to do both of us at the end.
Yeah, okay. So let's take one question first from an anonymous participant. How do you convince, especially the government, that BI is relevant in designing policy and regulation?
It's a very good.
Yeah. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a very good question, and I think one that many behavioral scientists around the world are sort of grappling with. I think it's really about sort of 2 things. It's first of all about demonstrating results. Demonstrating that it does work. Many governments around the world really start with sort of what we call the low-hanging fruit, the ones that are kind of easy to show the methodology works, and that it can generate positive results. But I think number 2 there as well is to also not hide from the bad results, or not say the bad results, not that we're affecting badly people's behavior, but sometimes there's the no result. Sometimes there's, a behavioral intervention shows that there is no benefit here. I think that's not something to hide behind. That is something that we need to be able to communicate, that BI is one of many tools in the policymaker's toolkit. And sometimes it's the best tool, sometimes another tool is the best tool. I think showing to policymakers both that the tool works and starting there and generating sort of positive perspectives of the tool. But then as you continue using the tool, to show them that, sometimes it's not the best and we can use a different tool is also very important. So it's really about communicating to them the results of the interventions, good or bad, and focusing on a strategy that really starts with sort of the quick wins, places where you think you'll have good startings.
Yeah, another question from our participants with regards to the fast-paced decision making, and it's coming from Shahidi. I share the same interest. Shahidi asks, he's interested in knowing about the rapid method, maybe a good example, or maybe perhaps you can illustrate how does fast-paced decision-making involving BI is implemented, James.
Sure. It's a really good question, and it's one that the community is very, very sort of puts a lot of importance on right now. Well, I think during the pandemic, you saw it a lot. There was a lot of use of basically quick survey designed, survey-based methods to sort of implement behavioral interventions. So rather than doing a big randomized control trial where you have a test group and a control group, you apply the treatment to one, not the other, and see the difference. You rather run either quick questionnaire or survey-based or maybe very quick lab-based experiments where indeed the evidence that's generated from that might not be as robust as a randomized control trial, but it helps sort of start pointing the finger at what might be some of the barriers and what might be some of the solutions. You saw many governments in COVID sort of rapidly test through A/B testing, or again, survey-based testing, different communication tools, different ways to communicate evidence, using it to try to identify some of the barriers and biases. There was a international study called COSMO, COSMO, that was run by multiple countries, where it was tracking every every 2 weeks it was implemented, and they added excuse me, and they added behavioral questions to the Cosmo study. So it wasn't about behavior, but they added behavioral questions to the Cosmo study to try to see every 2 weeks how sort of behavioral issues were changing over time, and try to identify them there. Stepping out of COVID, we did some work on applying behavioral insights to safety culture in the energy sector, where we used a very similar, what we call behavioral vignettes, basically scenarios that we created, sort of different scenarios via a survey-based method, and use different behavioral insights to sort of see how people would react to those scenarios. And again, it wasn't about a randomized control trial. It was about trying to rapidly test different ways that individuals would react to a different scenario and seeing where some of the behavioral issues might come up from there. So it's really about these sort of rapid methods that allow you to quickly identify different ways. And then from there, you can iterate. So yes, of course, it was one point in time, but then you take that learning and the next survey or the next questionnaire, you iterate it down and you iterate it again. And through that process of iteration, you can start generating some pretty robust evidence.
And one last question before we let you go, James. Should all behavioral interventions be pilot tested before mass rollout, or are there exceptions if one needs urgent implementations?
That's a very good question. That's definitely $1 million question right there. I mean, I would say that it's the best idea to test at at a pilot level all policy interventions in general. I think both behavioral as well as sort of on honestly real policy interventions as well too, or not real, but non-behaviorally informed policies as well. I think it's incredibly important to understand what might be the policy impact before rolling it out at scale. And definitely in the behavioral insights methodology that we use, BASIC, that is the entire BASIC methodology, is to test at a small scale to make sure what you are trying to do does theoretically work before you get to the very end of BASIC, which is the C, change, behavior change, which is where you scale up the intervention for policy change. However, I mean, to answer the question a bit more directly, we saw things like crises and the COVID pandemic really challenge this model of being able to test something. And so in extreme crisis situations, sometimes you do need to rely on sort of these things to sort of roll it up right away. However, I would say there that you have to be extremely cautious to make sure you're standing on very solid footing, very commonly held findings before trying that. And it's really a last case resort, I would say. But really the focus should be on testing at small scale first.
James, there are more questions coming in, but I believe I have to let you go now. You're rushing to another meeting. But,
I have another half an hour, 45 minutes, but I think FAISAL also wants to intervene. So
if I can take one more.
Sure.
Question. The question goes, is it possible to combine BI with game theory in the context of policy making? Definitely.
I have a colleague who actually works very, very closely on that. That's one of his very, very intense sort of research agendas. I don't know much about it personally because I haven't done it. But if you want to reach out, I have my slides will be shared at the end, and please do of course email me. I'll definitely put you in touch with my colleague who works much more on that. But definitely game theory, and I know there's a lot of behavioral science around that as well.
All right. So yes, James, thank you very much for joining us, being on board in our conference today. We will share your slides with all the participants after the conference ends. So thank you once again, James.
Thank you. Thank you again very much. I really appreciate it.
It's very insightful presentation. And as promised, the slides presented by James just now will be shared to all participants. I think it will be emailed, if I'm not mistaken. I'll confirm about that later on. And also we'll be sharing you the links for the sessions as well. So let's move on to our second presenter. The second presenter is Mr. FAISAL NARU. FAISAL NARU is the Executive Director of Policy Innovation Center, NESG. And FAISAL has over 20 years working on governance, public policy, and also corporate management. He is the co-founder and director of Think, Test, Do. It's a learning, discovery, and enhancement partner to organizations around the world that uses strategy, analytics, and behavioral insights to address key issues in governance, management, and policy, public policy. FAISAL is also a visiting fellow at University of Cambridge. He was the inaugural executive director of the Policy Innovation Center, working with Rockefeller Philanthropy Agency in Africa. and among other publications, FAISAL was instrumental at setting up the OECD work on behavioral insights publication entitled Behavioral Insights in Public Policy. Faisal is not able to join us live. His presentation has been pre-recorded. Nevertheless, participants are welcome to ask questions and interact via online, and those questions will be addressed later by the organizer. So without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Faisal NARU.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. It's great to be able to give this talk to you today at the event on behavioral insights inside Malaysia. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak to you all and to be able to go through a bit more around behavioral insights from around the world. My name is Faisal NARU. I've been working on behavioral insights for inside public policy for well over a decade. Previously, I actually founded the work on behavioral insights inside the OECD 10 years ago. And did various different jobs there. And more recently, I just set up the Behavioral Insights team inside Nigeria with the Policy Innovation Center, which is Africa's first behavioral insights unit nationally. And I'm very happy to be here today to be able to share with you lots of hopefully interesting insights around behavioral science and how it's being applied across the world. So for me today, I'd like to go through a few different things with you and just explain a few things around behavioral insights. The first thing is I'd like to just give you a quick introduction to behavioral insights and then explain to you a bit more about what's been happening around behavioral insights across the world and then present to you some key lessons for anybody who wants to be applying behavioral insights inside public policy. So firstly, what is behavioral insights? Well, the reason why behavioral insights has become such a key prominent factor, not only in public policy, but in the private sector as well, is the realization that ultimately we think much less than we think we think. So although we think that we do lots of different things when we make decisions, in fact, what really is being found here is that people aren't really thinking as much as maybe policymakers or even people in businesses think that people might be thinking when they are making their decisions. And those decisions could be on lots of different things. They could be on what kind of insurance to buy, what kind of decisions they need to make for their pensions, what kind of investments they need to make for the future. Lots of different things. There are often assumptions about how people make their decisions. But what is really being found here is that people behave in strange but predictable ways. So here you can see a picture from a place not too far from Malaysia, where you can see here people crossing the road even though there is a bridge there. And I'll come back to this in a bit later on. But I just wanted, this is a very good picture that shows that although policy may have designed and town planners may have designed as using a bridge, people aren't. And why is that? Why does this happen? Well, the reason why is because the way we make decisions is complex. It's not simple. And there are lots of factors that come into there because we are complex ourselves. Well, we have lots of different pressures on us. We have lots of different things that we are constantly thinking about. If you go back to the previous picture where you could see the picture of Homer Simpson. Homer Simpson may be too busy thinking about pizza and thinking about donuts and thinking about, many of you may be thinking about at the moment as well, football. Instead of thinking about, well, what kind of investments do I need to make? But there are also, on a more serious note, there are lots of different reasons why people make decisions, and it's not simply clear. Sometimes there are time pressures. There are financial constraints that people face. Sometimes it could be the time of the year, it could be the seasons, it could be the weather. Sometimes it could be the emotions that people have. Sometimes it can also be what other people are doing that influences people to behave in a certain way, or the way that people perceive other people are doing things. That can also make them behave in a certain way. Or it could be people's beliefs. It could be what they believe, their principles, and all of those different factors can lead people towards making certain decisions. And it's not as clear cut as people simply making decisions in a very binary fashion. And understanding that has been the reason why behavioral insights has become more of a prominent tool inside public policy making over the past decade or so. Because behavioral insights brings together lots of different disciplines. It brings together psychology, decision and cognitive science, sociology, neuroscience, economics, just to name a few. But it takes the learnings and the lessons from all of these different academic disciplines, and it is using a lot of the lessons and a lot of the rich knowledge that is there in order for us to get a much better understanding of how to do behavioral public policy. And what behavioral public policy is doing is that is helping policymakers and decision makers inside public policy institutions to understand, why are people behaving the way that they are? How can we shape public policies and regulations for real people, not people that we assume are going to behave in a certain way, but real people in their real lives, in their real context, with all of those different pressures that I mentioned earlier on and the ways that people make decisions. How can we deliver effective and efficient policies and regulations to achieve public policy goals? And how can we do that successfully and consistently? And how do we know that we were successful? How do we know that our public policy goal, our public policy intervention, or regulatory intervention was the one that actually made the difference? How do we know those things? And these are all the different reasons why behavioral public policy has come into play over the past decade or so, is because the people are using those sciences that I mentioned before in order to answer these very important questions and to be able to begin to do public policy in a more effective way that takes account of people and who they are in their real lives and in their real environments, and not make assumptions about why they are doing certain different things. And I'll give you a quick example. So where I've been working at the moment, we've been doing quite a bit of work in Africa on anti-corruption. And one of the biggest things that many people do when they want to stop people from having some kind of behavior is to send a message. And this is actually a message from the United States in a national park, where people were taking wood from the park. So at the park, a sign was put up, and the sign says, "Please don't take wood because the park is being changed by the many visitors who steal." Now, what was the impact of this message? Many of you may be thinking that this message is a good message. It's trying to get people to understand that people are stealing wood, and because they're stealing wood, it is changing the nature of the park. And of course, people who come to the park, they care about the park, and so people will stop stealing. Well, actually, theft of wood almost tripled. It went up from 3% to 8% after this particular sign came in. And you see this a lot in lots of other areas that governments do, where they think that putting out a message is the way to change behavior, that people just don't know. Let's provide them with information, or let's give them a strong political message to say, for instance, let's stop corruption, or we're going to fight corruption. That has been something that has done a lot, and a lot of studies have showed that actually corruption goes up when you send those messages. In a similar way here, stealing went up when you sent that message. Now, the reason why is because what this is doing is this is telling people that, well, other people are stealing. And unfortunately, the way that what we know about behavioral insights and social norming is that this provides a social norming effect. Is that what this does is that this tells people that it's normal to steal wood, that many other people are stealing wood, or it's normal to do corruption because many other people are doing corruption. So I'll do corruption, or I'll steal wood, instead of the desired impact that was wanted here, is that you want to stop people from doing these actions. So the point here is that although a policy may be trying to do something, if it doesn't take account of how people will actually behave, it may have the negative effect. So let's go back to this picture. So why do people behave the way they do? Why are people, clearly there's a bridge there, and there are cars coming, but people are still crossing the road. Why are they crossing the road? Well, let's start to look at the environment and the context. First of all, you'll notice that someone's wearing shorts, and we all know that the environment is such that it's hot, and often very humid in Southeast Asia. Secondly, we'll see that there is a traffic light there, and the person is actually clearly looking at the traffic light. So they may be thinking that, oh, well, there's a traffic light there. The traffic light will stop cars, and even though it's quite a distant away, I can still cross the road safely. I'm perfectly capable of doing that. You can see here that there are stairs going up. Now, if you go back to the environment, it's hot, it's humid, it's sticky. Many people here are wearing suits. Are they really going to walk upstairs in order to cross the road? We'll also see here that there are some elderly people here. Now, the elderly people in this particular instance, they don't have anything that too heavy that you can see that they're carrying, but they are elderly. And again, in that environment where it's hot, where it's humid, is it easily accessible for people who are elderly, or even people who are, for instance, disabled, or any other particular person that might have difficulties in climbing the stairs in order to cross the road? And finally, you'll see here that there's a barrier, and that barrier is maybe giving people a signal that, yes, you shouldn't be crossing the road, but you should only not be crossing the road where there's the barrier, because that's the dangerous part. Anywhere else along the road is fine for you to be able to cross. Now, the honest answer to this is that we don't really know, unless we've actually done the research and unless we've actually done some studies in order to, or some consultations in order to try and find out why people are behaving the way that they are, and why is it that they are crossing the road where they are crossing the road with all of these different factors there. We don't know. But what we can probably say here is that many people act quite rationally, as you would end up realizing, and not irrationally from walking down the road or walking across the bridge in order to cross the road. So behavioral insights across the world, what has been going on? Well, really, behavioral insights, I would say, has a long history, going all the way back to actually the 18th century with Adam Smith, who first of all started to think about the fact that people have these influences on them about how they behave, and not just being rational actors. But most recently, there was also a number of Nobel Prizes that were given as well. But I think back in 2008, this was probably one of the most influential books, certainly inside government circles, which is Nudge by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. Richard Thaler went on to win the Nobel Prize in 2017 for his groundbreaking work on behavioral economics. Cass Sunstein was appointed in the White House, and both of them worked for President Obama, and was one of the first pioneers to be applying behavioral insights and nudge theory inside government. And both of them have been continuing to do that and have been doing fantastic work there. But reading inside the book Nudge, which is that any aspect of choice architecture that alters people's behavior in a predictable way without forbidding any options or significantly changing their economic incentives is described as a nudge. And that was probably the start of being able of if you like, the behavioral public policy movement inside governments, where this was an eloquent way of being able to describe to people how they can start to use behavioral insights inside public policy and to be able to develop better policies, understanding choice architecture, which is the environment within which people make their choices, and how to shape that in order to be able to help people to make better decisions for themselves. So that was 2008. Now, if we fast forward to 2017, this was some work that I did with some colleagues at the OECD, and you may well have just heard from one of them back in 2017, where there was about 200 behavioral initiatives across the world here that you can see. Now, if you fast forward to 2022, that has doubled. There's now over 400 behavioral insights initiatives going on all across the world in lots of different places, in new places, like the one I mentioned in Nigeria and in Africa, where I've been working, but also across in lots of other places as well, particularly in the Middle East and increasingly in Asia as well. And really, all of these different initiatives and bodies, what they're doing is that they're applying behavioral insights into different parts of the policy cycle. So whether that's in relation to the overarching strategy. So a good example of that is in India, where in 2019, the Indian Economic Outlook actually had an entire chapter on how to develop policies not for Homo sapiens and not for Homo economicus. And Homo economicus is the term used to describe that assumed person who thinks very rationally, who will do an extensive cost-benefit analysis, and then will make a rational decision on whatever it is, like I said, on whether it's on their pensions, or whether it's on investments, or whether it's on what kind of education they want to have, or anything else, instead of Homo sapiens who think and make decisions in a very different way. In policy design, there's lots of applications of designing policies based upon behavioral insights. The first probably policy design that was hugely prominent was done by the European Union when they outlawed default setting of additional products online. So for instance, if you were buying a train ticket before, your insurance was automatically included on and you had to opt out of paying for that. And that meant many people unknowingly were paying for things that they didn't know that they were paying for, because of course, in the real environment, when you're hurrying up and you're trying to make an online purchase, sometimes you just click, and you don't necessarily look at all of the fine print at the end, and people were finding that they'd been charged extra. And this was outlawed inside the European Union. So there's many other examples of this as well. In piloting and consulting, I think the biggest thing, particularly in consultation, is that when consultations happen, how biased are they? Are you trying to get evidence? Are you trying to do evidence-based policy, or are you doing policy-based evidence? So are you biasing your consultations according to your policy when you're doing that, in order for you to be able to get your get the evidence that you need? And there are lots of examples there. Then in the implementation of policies and regulations, and again, this is probably where behavioral insights first really started, was in the implementation of how can we improve the implementation by using behavioral insights, by changing the choice architecture, by structuring things in a different way, and then evaluating. So how do we know that what we did actually worked? how can we empirically understand that actually the interventions that we had actually did have the impact, and it wasn't by chance, or it wasn't going to happen in any case. So in all of these different areas, this is where behavioral insights is being applied. And one of the other areas that I wanted to also highlight was around having a different regulatory approach. And this comes into the strategy side as well. And this is a very good document that was done by both the Australian Securities and Investment Commission and the Dutch Authority for the Financial Markets, where what they were ultimately arguing is that we need to have a different way of consumer protection that goes beyond disclosure. That's simply saying to people that it's in the terms and conditions is not good enough. And particularly when we now begin to talk about the online world as well, that simply having that disclosure and to say that, for instance, it's all contained in cookies and everybody just clicks on cookies and says, like, but you don't really know what you're in order to be able to apply a better, a more effective consumer protection regime, for instance, for people. So there's some fundamental things here that are also being tackled by behavioral insights. Another key area where behavioral insights is also, if you like, at the cutting edge of fundamental change is on behavioral insights in organizations, which is introducing a behavioral mindset inside organizations. This is, I did some work, my last position in the OECD was as a Chief of Staff for the Executive Director of the OECD. And there we were working on changing the organizational behavior and actually applying it inside the organization in order to improve the running of the organization. So whether that was from improving our recruitment and de-biasing the recruitment to us improving various different types of staff behavior that we needed to try and improve, whether that was on cybersecurity or whether that was on, as happened in many other places, we were applying this for our COVID response for the organization as well. And you can read a lot more about that in the Behavioral Economics Guide 2021. You'll see the source at the bottom around what are the kinds of things that happen, but also around how to make the organization more sustainable. Because ultimately, an organization and the way that it behaves is based upon how the individuals inside the organization are behaving in the first instance. So there's some 4 key steps here that were really learned and detailed inside the article in the Behavioral Economics Guide, which is that setting the principles for how the organization needs to be running, doing practices and getting methodologies up and running, proof of concept, so running projects with staff to be able to do that. So for instance, we were doing that with our human resources staff and in us working on the recruitment processes, and then phasing it. It's not, when you're talking about mindset change, you're talking about change management of an organization, a big bang effect doesn't really work. So there has to be a more strategic approach to this. And José Touchet, who's the executive director at the OECD, who I was working for, she very much was a prominent figure in understanding that, in being able to help that change inside the organization, like a big international organization like the OECD itself. So these are some of the key, some of the areas where behavioral insights is being applied from across the world, and where it can also be applied in many different ways and organizations inside Malaysia as well. So what are key lessons? So I describe this as the 3 E's of key lessons of why behavioral insights has worked well and how to get behavioral insights to work well as well. The first lesson, and you can read more about it in an article that I did, and you can see the link at the bottom there. The first lesson is that it's empirical, that the behavioral public policy movement, it has a scientific underpinning. And like I mentioned before, there's a long line of work that has happened. And, I've mentioned a few people, but, there's so many other people that I could mention, and key prominent academics that are currently working as well, where where there are lots of key lessons to applying this. And I mean, for instance, one of the other positions that I hold at the moment is that I'm a visiting fellow for Cambridge University's Judge Business School's new LIANG Institute for Behavioral Economics and Public Policy. And there again, there is going to be lots of further work on behavioral insights, and Professor Reich, Lucia Reich, who heads it up, she's been a key prominent figure in the field, again, around consumer protection and sustainability and sustainable behaviors. And so there's lots of links towards academia and to current learning and current research that is a key component as towards why behavioral insights has firstly taken root in over 400 initiatives across the world, but also why it continues to be a key tool for policymakers, because it's something that is coming from things that have been tried and tested already. The second key lesson is that behavioral insights is experimental. It's experimental in nature, which means that it applies a scientific and rigorous methodology to testing and trialing before implementing. And it can do it in various different ways. There are rapid ways of testing, and there are shorter ways, there are longer ways of testing, which are more rigorous. And there are different ways that are being applied in lots of different areas, and there's lots of diverse views about what is the best standard and which is a different way. But the point I wanted to make here is that experimentation is a key part of that. And the reason why is because we start with the assumption that we don't know. We don't know, but we know how to find out. And through experimenting, we can find out, why are people crossing the road where they're crossing the road? Why are people not using the bridge? We can find those things out. And so, and then we can test to see, is there a better way for us to do this? A very good example of, for instance, if we talk about human traffic, not human trafficking, but human traffic in the way that people move, is that there are some university campuses where instead of them, in a new campus, instead of them building the garden and the walkways, what they actually did is that they left it, and they left to see where people were naturally walking. And wherever people naturally walk, then they built the pathways according to that. Instead of what normally happens with these kind of things and planning is that you build the pathways and you have a nice green grass area, and everybody cuts across the grass and the grass gets ruined. But they did it the other way around. And so they actually found out where people were going to be walking, where they're going to move, and then they built the beautiful grass and the beautiful planting area, etc., etc. So experimentation is part of this process. And then the final thing is being ethical. Behavioral insights is not about manipulation. It's not about people or governments or institutions trying to coerce people and make them do things that they don't want to do. The way that behavioral insights is being practiced is in a very transparent way. There are reports that are produced that tell people what they are doing. And it's also done in a very pro-social way, which is that it's always done with good in mind. That's the way that in the behavioral public policy movement has been moving, and it has certain standards that it adheres to in order to make sure that it remains ethical, and that people are and governments and institutions are applying this in a very ethical manner. So that has been one of the I think one of the key reasons why behavioral insights has flourished over the last decade or so, is because there hasn't been those news stories that there's been some manipulation being done in these 400 different initiatives across the world, but rather it's being done in a very ethical way, according to ethical standards, where ethical protocols are followed. And so that is also a key component that is important for anywhere, including Malaysia, who wants to be applying behavioral insight. So in conclusion, really what I hope that you'll get from this particular I guess presentation that I've been doing is firstly that behavioral public policy, it is now a thing. It's not something that it has passed by and that not many people are doing, or not many governments are doing. Quite the opposite. Excuse me. Also, it's being used across the world, not just in one place, but across the world, to improve policy, strategy, design, and delivery. And these are also ways that can be applied inside Malaysia. A point that I didn't make before, but I do want to make now, is that it's not a silver bullet. Behavioral insights is not something that will solve all of the problems that are there. It's a tool, but it's an important tool. And it's one of those tools that are being applied and should be part of the toolkit of a policymaker. Behavioral insights, it requires expertise. It requires expertise to be able to do these kind of things, and you can see there in the corner there as a logo for Think Test Do, which is our initiative that helps governments and helps countries to be able to get that expertise, and there are many others out there who are also helping. And then finally, it must be ethical. Because in order to be able to be successful in the long run in all public policy, we all know that ethics is incredibly important, and that having public trust is something that can't be taken for granted and can be built through doing good public policy work, and in particular using behavioral insights as well. So with that, I'd like to say terima kasih. Thank you very much. Sorry I could not be with you live. I'm in another panel in another country in India, actually, at the same time as your conference as well. But I'm very glad to be able to have provided you with this presentation, and you can see my contact details there as well. And if there's any way that we can help you in your journey, please do feel free to get in touch. Terima kasih.
Sama-sama. There was a pre-recorded session with FAISAL NARU, the Executive Director, Policy Innovation Center, NESG. And earlier, we were live with James Drummond, Lead Analyst of OECD. And from both presenters, were able to garner some key points. We know that BI has evolved in leaps and bounds, and latest study has shown that BI helps in facilitating, introducing reform, as well as facilitate fast-paced decision-making, particularly during the pandemic. Those were experimental indeed. And there are ways how government all over the world, upon full understanding of its mechanics, use BI to facilitate not just meager changes, but also to promote reform. And this is evident in some cases across the globe. So currently there are more than 400 BI initiatives across the world, handling different phase of policy cycle, which will then provide us more insights for us to learn from. And our commitment nationally will then also add more value to these already global initiatives. And I'm referring to the One Ministry, One BI project campaign. So I think it's going to be a very fruitful future ahead, inshallah, with BI in place. Before we move on to our forum, I would like to take your attention on our survey forms. I would like to kindly request and remind all participants to fill in the form. And by so doing, will entitle you for the e-certificate of attendance, which will be sent to you after the conference. You can find the survey form from the link shared on the platform and on our social media account. Let's now move quickly to our forum. We have a host of distinguished speakers from various sectors joining us today, and moderating the session is Mr. Muhammad Shahidi Ismail. Mr. Shahidi is an MPC associate. Shahidi, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tuan Syed Punawar. Assalamualaikum, good evening to Dato' Luqman Abdul Hakim, Dato' Abdul Latif, Haji Abu Suman, Tansri, Dato' panelists, and all the audience. I'm Muhammad Shahidi Ismail, an MPC Associate and the CEO of Talent and Search, Sendirian Berhad. I'm pleased to be your moderator for the evening. There will be a very exciting evening planned, yeah? We will have 5 distinguished panelists who will be sharing their experiences and their challenges in implementing behavioral insights within government organizations. I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce the audience to our panelists. Our first panelist is Mr. SAIFUL ADLI bin SUHAIMI from Institute for Health Behavioural Research, NIH, or National Institute of Health. Second is Mr. Nicholas HING LIANG from Institute for Clinical Research, also from NIH. Dr. IZHAR of Sancy, Berhad. Dr. SHAHIDA binti MUSA from Federal Agricultural Marketing Authority, FAMA. And Mr. GANESH KUMAR NADARAJAH, Eden Strategy Institute. So we bring together policymakers and practitioners who have experience in building capacity and applying behavioral insights within government organization. Our goal today is not just to create awareness, but to ensure that behavioral insight can be understood, implemented, and successfully expanded in the regulatory policy making practices, especially again within the government organization. This is in line with this year's National Conference on Behavioral Insight 2022 motto, mainstreaming behavioral insight for better policy. There will also be opportunities for questions that can be given via our chat room or via Facebook and YouTube comments. For the audience information, this panel discussion can also be watched and participated via Malaysia Productivity Corporation, or as we know it, MPC, their Facebook page and the YouTube channel. So without further ado, I guess we'll start. The faster the better. To start the discussion, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. SAIFUL ADLI bin SUHAIMI from Institute for Health Behavioural Research, NIH. Mr. SAIFUL is the head of Behavioural Insight Unit for NIH and has been in NIH since 2019. Prior to this, he was the Health Education Officer in Health Education Division, Ministry of Health Malaysia since 2007. Mr. SAIFUL will be presenting behavioural science in health promotions in Malaysia. So please, Mr. SAIFUL, the floor is yours. Silakan.
Okay, thank you to Mr. Shahidi, and thank you to MPC for this lovely conference that brings us all these behavioural insights practitioners across the country and two from international speakers. So allow me to share the screen, share the slide. Okay. Okay, so you can see my slide now. Okay, so if you can see my slide now, so I shall start right now. Okay, again, my name is SAIFUL ADLI bin SUHAIMI. Currently, I'm a head of Behavioural Insight Unit, which just recently established in less than 3 months. So we are currently in Institute for Health Behavioural Research in the National Institute of Health, located in Setialam under the Ministry of Health Malaysia. So basically, the slide I will briefly explain the application of how behavioral science and behavioral insights been applied in the health promotion in Malaysia. Okay, just to give you a perspective on what behavioral science in health Malaysia applied. So basically, health education services began in the 1960s with a focus on increasing community awareness and skills in the prevention of infectious disease. So this is how we start. And the importance of health educators was recognized then by the WHO in 1970s in this country, with the main focus on educating the community in healthy lifestyle practices. So in Malaysia, health promotion and health educational activities is carried out by a profession called a health education officer. And in terms of work of national planning, implementing, coordinating, and evaluation of health promotion and health education activities in Malaysia, so it's currently under supervision of the Health Education Division, located in MOH HQ in Putrajaya. So while the establishment of the Institute for Health Behavior Research in 1995, so where we're focusing on providing a data science on behavioral science among our roles to conduct research, provide capacity building, and also consultancy services on behavioral science research. So basically, this is how the landscape of health promotion activities and how it was carried out, and who are the main player in the country. So basically, when you look at this slide, this picture, so this is a classic example of how we used to educate people in the community in health back in the days. So we use entertainment as a strategy to attract community to come to health education activities. And as we know, people back in the days, they love Bollywood movies, cowboy movies. So that's how health staff, health educators use that entertainment as a main attraction to invite, just to spike some interest for community to come out to join the activities, and at the same time where health educators use this opportunity to convey message, to do health education activities and everything related to health. So this is how behavioral science was applied back in the days. We use what people love and what people want to see. So why we need behavioral science in health? So first, we need to in-depth understanding of human health-related behaviors and aids in planning of precise and targeted intervention. Just remember that when we sick, we go to the clinic and doctors prescribe us a medication, for example, a paracetamol. And it took us a motivation, self-efficacy, and other determinants just to put the medication in our mouth. So without that, so we won't comply with the recommendation by the doctors. So apart from that, the design we use because of the low-cost solutions in altering health-related behaviors that will enhance healthcare delivery and services. And lastly, to provide a broader perspective on disease causation that goes beyond biomedical approaches, utilizing theory-based intervention, frameworks, and also population-based approaches. So if you look at this timeline, so this is a snapshot of how behavioral science is practiced. So in this case, I would like to highlight the case of healthy campaign, healthy lifestyle campaign, which we started about 30 years back. So because we believe that public health intervention based on social and behavioral science theories are more effective than those lacking in a theoretical base. So I would like to bring attention on the strategy that we use when we started this disease-based. For example, if you remember back in the days, campaign Cintailah Jantung Anda, diabetes, so it's part of the disease that we promote. So apart from that, we move on to the behavior base in 1997, where we start to focus on healthy eating, exercise, good mental health practice, and smoking cessation. And starting on 2003, so we feel that behavior change communication should be in place and should be focused on. So this is where the time we engage with a lot of communication channels and communication channels and mediums. And then we're moving on to 2011, where we start to build and develop a numerous behavior intervention and empowerment in the community. If you are familiar with a program like a Combi for dengue prevention, young doctors for healthy lifestyle practices in school-based, and also co-span. So, and then currently we just focusing on how to give community some sort of empowerment, how to give them a value of health so that they can be empowered to become a health agent, a change agent in the community via Health Malaysia National Agenda or Agenda Nasional Malaysia Sihat. So this is a snapshot of how the behavioral science practice in Malaysia currently. In terms of health promotion. Just to take an example, a program called COMBI, a Communication for Behavior Impact, so which is applied for dengue prevention in the community. It is a dynamic approach that uses behavioral intervention and community empowerment just to educate community on how to safeguard their house from become a mosquito breeding places. And then apart from that, a social mobilization and communication strategy to influence behavior change is also applied. So to address the alarming issue of NCDs, for example, diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular diseases, a community-based program called Healthy Community Empowers the Nation, or COSPAN, was created in 2013, where we train volunteers from community to conduct, for example, activities like screening, exercise, structured exercise activity, and also a mental health program and anti-smoking awareness activities. So I would like to bring the attention now on how we applied behavioral science or behavioral insight during the pandemic, or how behavioral science have been proven, or behavioral insight have been proven as a beneficial tool in managing pandemics in our country. So during the crisis, yes, we modeled behavior. And days of days, we're telling people what to do, and we know that people are already quite fatigued when it comes to nudges and instruction. So we always tell people to staying at home, masking, checking in, getting vaccinated. Yes, people might listen or might comply at the beginning, but just imagine almost 1.5 years that we've been telling community people just to safeguard themselves, staying at home, masking, checking in, getting vaccinated day by day, and they become fatigued. Because it's already more than 1.5 years, as I mentioned earlier, telling people just to safeguard them from getting COVID-19, and then people become fatigued, and when they fatigue, they become more rebellious, they start to become angry, and then they try to react in many certain ways. And for example, social gatherings. How many people that comply to social gatherings actually? Because in our institute, so we did a research where we do observation, a research where we found that few places where community could not comply more to the social gathering or social distance precaution measures. Okay, so in accordance with that, so what we do during COVID-19, so we try to convey messages to public. So how we do that? So using a message framing technique. So we listen to them, and how we do that? Because we use a public sentiment strategy or analysis using a few social media medium channel. So we divide into 4 teams: before MCO, during MCO, after the extension of MCO, and also for the vaccine. So there are few teams emerge, and based on the teams emerge, so we come out and we develop a certain specific message based on what public really want and not what we want to hear. So that's how we use a message framing. And then during the during the managing of COVID-19 also, so for behavioral science to have an impact, it is important to have trust and clear communication. So for example, our previous minister always provide the truth on the data that cases will arise, but don't be alarmed. So this is more than anything else. And it's a question of credibility before people decide to change. And here, we don't assume they are equal to us. We want to listen to what they say. So, for example, during the opening of registration of AstraZeneca vaccine, so if you remember that less than 1 hour, how the website is crashed. So, and then it spiked angry, so people become not happy and unsatisfied with the ministry. So, what the government have do, so we have to come out and apologize and promise to take action. This is to some sort of comforting the people and just to have to gain back the trust. So next, during the pandemic, so just make sure that information that we put is actionable and easy to follow. And the best form of risk communication that lead to potential behavior change is something that easily actionable and accessible. So here, for example, in my SUHAIMI, where we have a follow-through reminder, if you remember, like how many days before the day you got your vaccine appointment. For example, T-3 days before appointment, T-2 days before your vaccine appointment. So this is what we call plan your journey. Be prepared, goal setting approach. And also we translate vaccine information to various language and dialect used in Malaysia because we know this is very personal. So there will be no barriers to action. So it is important to create choice architecture that minimize friction. So we also believe in this context, nudges has to speak to the heart. So here we do vaccination in the mosque, and we know that among resistant community there was religious element to it. So we got the imam to go first, and that was enough of the nudges because imam alone able to create credibility and belief to affect the community. So again, during the booster time where we use a nudge. So again, we do a follow-through strategy. So where SMS message pop out or notification pop out in your handphone. So we provide them again with how many days before the booster vaccination appointment. And then not only that, to empower community, also a part of behavioral science that we applied is a community empowerment. So because we knew that at the time, for example, hospital facility has been maximized at the time of pandemic. So leaving us no choice to empower community for home isolation. So in this case, where you can see that in your notification, if you are suspected positive COVID, there will be a red reminder indicate in your apps. So lastly, I want to come to attention that changing humans' behavior, especially health behavior, is a complex and non-linear process. Hence, using a behavioral science provides a rigorous evidentiary basis to understand human behavior. And this will ultimately strengthen health system and save lives. So with that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you.
Really on time, yeah, Dr. Saiful, Cik Saiful. You sounded like our ex-minister, KJ. Sound a bit like KJ. So I've been in a workshop with Mr. Saiful before. I know how dedicated Mr. Saiful is. He got into an accident and still he came and explained and still go on with the workshop. But to have one question, Mr. Saiful, this is quite personal from me. Do you need to be interested? Do you need to be passionate about behavioral science to implement BI, or this is your opinion? I'm just asking for an opinion.
So personally, what I can say that it comes naturally. So in the event of your life, so you will have at one point where you are. I remember that there was something that incident that happens to you, and if you sit back and try to ponder back, so basically it reflect back to what how we behave and what is our behavior like. So personally, to me, I think interest will come later, but it's more on being sensible, being responsible in your life. So where, because human and behavior and human is interchangeable, and we cannot run away from that. So it comes naturally, and basically you study about human being, and it is interest because human behavior science or behavior insights applied across all multidisciplinary areas. And I think when talk about behavior science, so it will come naturally. So you have to get personal interest or just to wait for interest or anything that related to it. So that's my personal opinion.
Okay. How do you think can we advance the application of BI in health promotion?
Okay, there are a few challenges, if I can say, in the health system, because currently we are too much depending on the medical model. So, and if I can say this, that when we talk about Ministry of Health, so basically what people see is Ministry of Doctors and Nurses. But it's more than that. But in terms to promote, to highlight the use of behavioral science, so we need evidence. So just to get, just run a small project or done a few activities that we can provide some evidence, database, which we can get buy-in from people out there. So in the sense that we only have a chance to highlight and to promote behavioral science. Just we need evidence that yes, behavioral science works. We go to like this, we save costs, and yes, you can apply it.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Cik Saiful, Mr. Saiful. For the time being, there's no question yet. If there's questions, I'll get back to you, Mr. Saiful. So I guess we'll continue the session, and I would like to introduce our second speaker. Our second speaker is Mr. Nicholas HING Yi Liang. Okay. Mr. Nicholas HING Yi Liang is a research pharmacist in Center for Clinical Epidemiology, Institute for Clinical Research. Mr. Nicholas is interested in behavioral science as he has published several articles in peer-reviewed journals and is also a peer reviewer for journals such as BMJ, Global Health, and Scientific Reports. His research interests include behavioral economics, behavioral intervention on healthcare-related matters, and economic evaluation of healthcare intervention. Today, Mr. Nicholas will be speaking on the topic, when do persuasive messages on vaccine safety steer COVID-19 vaccine acceptance and recommendation? So I guess the floor is yours, Mr. Nick. Silakan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shahidi, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon to all distinguished guests. My name is Nicholas. I'm from the Institute for Clinical Research at the National Institutes of Health. So while I wait for the slides to be uploaded, yes. So I'd like to, before that, I'd like just to extend my sincere thanks to the organizing committee for inviting me to present on a research project which my team and I conducted last year in 2021. And it has resulted in a publication which is entitled When Do Persuasive Messages on Vaccine Safety Steer COVID-19 Vaccine Acceptance and Recommendations. This project is actually a good example to show how behavioral insights is applied in clinical research to sort of steer the policy making in terms from the aspect of health communication. So this project was a joint collaboration between several institutes such as IHPR, the Health Education Division, University of Malaya, LSE, and University of Malaysia. All right, next. Okay, so in the interest of time, I won't be presenting all the results which were published in the article, but if you're interested to learn more, you can just Google out the title and you can read it from there. Next. Okay, so as we all know, risk communication is a very effective tool to sort of influence the decision-making of people, whether or not they would want to accept, remain hesitant, or refuse a particular health intervention or behavior. However, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, we were not really sure what sort of persuasive messages can actually be effective or ineffective at raising intentions to want to get the COVID-19 vaccine, as well as recommending the vaccine to other people. Hence, my research team decided to conduct a project where we sort of experimented with several different messages using various frames to find out which of these actually help improve the intention to 4 different outcomes, mainly intention to get vaccination, and whether or not they would want to recommend the vaccine to healthy adults, the elderly, as well as people with medical conditions. We designed the messages with side effects and safety as the main theme, simply because it was the top concern that was raised among vaccine hesitant people in multiple surveys during that period. Okay, next. So we went on to conduct a randomized control experiment. So firstly, we recruited participants and measured their baseline intentions to get the COVID-19 vaccine, as well as the recommendation intentions to the 3 populations that I mentioned. After that, we randomized them according to age, ethnicity, and household income, and they will be exposed to either 1 or 2 messages, depending on which arm they were randomized to. After message exposure, they were then reassessed on their intent to vaccinate again, as well as their intent to recommend the vaccine. We also conducted a post hoc analysis to find out whether any socio-demographic characteristics were influential towards these different outcome measures after message exposure. But in the interest of time, I won't be presenting this post hoc analysis. Next slide. So this slide basically just shows an example, the list of messages that we experimented with. I just want to quickly make a note that we experimented with various nudge techniques, such as descriptive norms, using the authoritative figure from the government and also healthcare workers, using negative or positive attribute frames, risky choice framing in the context of vaccine safety and vaccine side effects. We also have a control message. Right, next slide. This slide just shows that there were a total of 14 arms in our study. So each of these arms will have a different intervention message. So if you notice, arm 1 to 8, there is only one single message which we exposed participants to, whereas arm 9 to 14, there was a combination of 2 different messages, with the DN 70% message held constant. DN 70% represents the descriptive norm message that talks about 70% of Malaysians want to get the vaccine and you should get it too. I'll explain more about that later. All right. So we did that in interaction with ARM 9 to 14. We purposely combined two messages together to sort of see whether there was any interactions if you combine two messages, which is something quite common in the natural world where people are exposed to multiple health promotion messages. Right, next slide. So this slide shows the example of the experimental messages which we use. This is an example of negative and positive attribute frames. At the top is a slogan which addresses the top concern that we are trying to target on, which is safety or side effects. In the middle is the main content of the message, which we incorporated the nudge technique. And below the content is a source to give the message a form of credibility. And the bottom is the call to action, which is a slogan. In the control message, it only has the slogan, the call to action slogan, right? So negative and attribute frame, basically to give a gist of it, we're just using the same statistics or same rates of side effects occurring in COVID-19 vaccines, which is reported, and we frame it in a positive way or a negative way. So negative way is showing like how many people get the side effects, 4 out of 100. But if you frame it positively, maintaining the same rate, you would say it as 96 out of 100 people don't get any side effects. All right. Okay, next slide. So this slide just basically shows the social demographics of the participants which we recruited. We recruited 5,784 participants in the study. Everything was well balanced, except for age. We recruited more of the younger age population simply because the experiment was conducted online. Next slide. This also shows that we have a good spread for household income, but in terms of education, we sampled a higher proportion of those from the higher education onwards, like college onwards. Right, next slide. Okay, this is just slide is just showing that what's the baseline characteristics of people. We saw that 60% actually said they would definitely want to get the vaccine. In terms of recommending to healthy adults, only 84% want to recommend it, which is very good. In terms of recommending to elderly, about 70% want to recommend it. Next slide. And in terms of recommending to people with underlying medical condition, we see only 50% of the sample wanting to recommend to this group of people, right? This is at baseline. Next slide. So this is the first outcome measure which we measured, which is intention to vaccinate. If you notice that none of the messages actually improved intention to vaccinate. In fact, 2 of the arms showed there was a significant reduction in the intention to vaccinate, all right? So some of it actually backfired. Okay, next slide. So I'd like to share several key findings. The first key finding from that particular result is that our results were actually very similar to many other studies which were conducted during that period. And there are several possible reasons. The first one being that according to the fuzzy trace theory, a brief verbatim stimulus, which is what we were doing with our experimental messages. They were very brief verbatim, words and figures, etc. This actually failed to translate into a very convincing gist of the information that sort of like would convince people to want to get the vaccine. In other words, people couldn't really get the gist in a very convincing manner. Another reason could be because it was a very brief interaction with the individuals when they were exposed to the message. So there's a very brief textual effect that may not be effective. Possibly maybe using, like images, animation could be more effective, or maybe exposing a longer exposure of the intervention. Another possible reason is that vaccine hesitant people tend to use experiential thinking systems when they make decisions. And this may not be very good when we want to use rational arguments and statistics to intervene, like what we were doing with our experimental messages. And because of that, there could be a reason why we were not able to nudge these vaccine hesitant people. Possibly the use of emotional reasoning messages could be better, more effective. Okay, next slide. This slide shows the intention to recommend to healthy adults, which also see a similar results, none of it improving intention. In fact, some of them actually causing reduction in intentions to recommend to healthy adults. Next slide. And but with recommending the vaccine to people with health conditions, we see several of our messages actually improving significantly the intention to recommend to these people. Next slide. So the next key finding I'd like to share is that we design our messages with safety as an attribute, and this was appealing to different groups of target populations that was being recommended to. So at baseline, we saw that above 80% of people want to recommend the vaccine to healthy adults. So the hesitant minority were not very convinced with safety as an element which we were trying to promote. Whereas for those who were recommending to unhealthy people, 50% said that at baseline they won't recommend, but after they were exposed to the message that talks about safety, they actually want to recommend, simply maybe because that people have that perception that unhealthy people with medical conditions were more susceptible to vaccine adverse effects. So by alleviating this concern, they were more confident to recommend. Next slide. This slide just shows that none of our messages work with the elderly when recommending the vaccine to the elderly. Next slide. And this is most probably because there's a cultural factor present in Malaysia among Asian communities on a broader context. So there is that inertia to recommend something risky to an elderly because they are regarded with higher esteem in an Asian community. So a lot of individuals were not very propelled to recommend to them after exposure. Next slide. The next key finding I'd like to share is that descriptive norms were ineffective in our study, and this is actually replicated in other studies conducted during that period. I'd like to note that 70% of Malaysians most probably did not translate into a very strong descriptive norm. It wasn't a very convincing value, and most probably is because that media reports actually suggest that government was targeting 80% of the population to be vaccinated. So 70% may not be a very convincing norm to begin with. The reason why we use 70% is because that it was actually the value that was quoted in a survey conducted by IZHAR in late December. So, and we see that such descriptive norms actually backfire when it comes to recommending to healthy adults, especially among the tertiary educated individuals. Next slide. The next key finding I'd like to share is that when you design messages and you use relatable words that are related to the target population that you want to recommend, it would give more effectiveness in terms of nudging people to recommend. So for instance, one of our descriptive norm message actually highlighted that the vaccine was tested amongst people with medical condition. So that sort of nudged people to want to recommend to this group. Whereas when we use another message that talks about risk comparison between the death rates of people taking the vaccine versus getting COVID-19, so we know that deaths were mostly associated with people with medical condition, hence that actually helped improve the intentions to recommend to them, but it actually reduced the intention to recommend to people who are healthy adults, simply because deaths were not really much associated with this group of people. So you want to think about such relatable words when you design messages. Next slide. Okay, this is the second last key finding, talks about negative and attribute frames. So we see that when we use our negative attribute frame message, it actually reduced the intention to want to get the vaccine. But when we use positive attribute frames, it actually improved the intention to recommend the vaccine to people with medical condition. And if you look into literature, you see that attribute frames, if you frame it in a positive manner, is actually more effective compared to negative. So something to think about when you design using attribute frames. Next slide. And the last key finding here is an interesting one. So on the left is actually the message which we use authoritative celebrity, which is the DG. And also we used healthcare workers trying to tell the people that a lot of them have been vaccinated, so they recommend that you get it too. However, we saw that there were no significant effects on all outcome measures. And this is probably because people were not able to identify this reference population, which is the healthcare workers. All right. And there was no personal touch or physical interaction between the healthcare worker and the individual reading the message. Hence, it didn't really manage to nudge them, as opposed to other studies which saw that if there was an interaction or an advice given by a healthcare worker, it actually helped improve the intention for someone to adopt that behavior. And lastly, a director general could be seen as accomplishing a bureaucratic task because he's a government official, and this could maybe cause some distrust when people read that message. But when we introduced the healthcare worker message with the weak descriptive norm message that I described just now, there was actually an interaction which we saw, and it actually improved the intention to recommend the vaccine to people with health conditions. And this could be because there was an incongruent norm highlighting this aspect, which caused a positive outcome. What I mean here is incongruent, meaning that 70% isn't a very convincing norm, but you have the other message which talks about healthcare workers recommending you to get it. So it's somewhat like an injunctive norm where you are telling people that, you know, you should get this, it's good for you. But at the same time, you read something which is a bit opposite, like, oh, but very little people are wanting to get it. So therefore, it propels you to do something positive. So in this case, it translated to recommending to people with health conditions the COVID-19 vaccine. Okay, last slide. So as a conclusion, I'd like to stress that messages addressing vaccine safety concerns should stimulate emotional reasoning and communicate the gist of the message convincingly. Persuasive messages intended to promote uptake of a novel health intervention should focus on safety dimensions as a form of assurance for others to recommend it to people with pre-existing health conditions, simply because maybe they perceive that people who have health conditions are more susceptible to adverse effects from novel health interventions. And lastly, the decision to take up or recommend a health intervention is based on perceived need, which is an internalized and externalized risk-benefit analysis. What I'm trying to say here is like whether you want to take up something or recommend something to someone, it may not be parallel with one another, because it depends on whether, when I want to take something, I would analyze, how good is it for me and how risky am I if I receive it versus someone else. So the other person may have different needs and wants. So the risk-benefit ratio could be different. So therefore, I may not want to receive it, but I may recommend it to someone else. So that is something which we found in our study. So with that, thank you so much for your attention. The next slides are my references, and yeah, thank you.
Found it interesting that most of the finding, the nudges doesn't work, yet we still learn from it.
Yeah.
I think this is the beauty of behavioral insight. Is the name itself is insight, kan? So it's about understanding and what works and even what doesn't work. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
But in my experience, I do see some nudges that works when it comes to vaccination. I remember this one time, there's Mate. I'm not really sure whether you are familiar with the word Mate. But Mate is someone who gave her suggestion on taking coconut drinks and cengkeh. What is cengkeh? Clove, I think.
Clove, yeah.
Yeah. Why does it work? Why do people tend to listen to Mate compared to some of the nudges technique that you did? In your opinion, this is just purely on your opinion.
Okay, so I think this is going towards the realm of identity economics. Yeah. So certain people, especially celebrities, so I think if you read up to date on the health communication literature and even literature on other marketing fields, etc., they tend to capitalize on celebrities or authoritative figures that command certain attention. And these people, whatever they say becomes the gospel's truth, because they are revered people who are famous, who have that sort of perception that, oh, they are right, so therefore I follow them. So these celebrities, they have that authoritative power with them, that whatever they say or do becomes something very influential. And hence, possibly like the person you mentioned just now, she could have commanded that sort of authority with her own social media following. Maybe there is a group of people who identify with this person, simply maybe because of cultural background or context, various other reasons that make that person very much relatable. And because of that, people tend to listen. So it's part of identity economics.
Yeah. And again, is it availability because of the the treatment that she suggested is just coconut drinks, just cengkeh, it's easier to get? Do you think and availability is another factor that may come into people's mind when it comes to listening to her?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So in fact, if you dive deep into behavioral, the discipline of behavioral science as well as the other different disciplines, one of the main aspects to drive behavior is how easy access a person can actually access that particular behavior. So like in the instance that you mentioned, the coconut drink is something very much available, easy to access, very low cost to achieve it, very low barriers. So hence people feel that kind of like, oh, so coconut water is good, so it's beneficial and it's easy for me to get it. It gives me more incentives to get it versus something like a very expensive supplement. You introduce high barriers, so it's very hard to do. So even like, for example, like talking about supplements, taking like the behavior of you want to take supplements on a daily habit. You don't put your supplement in the closet and lock it up, and then expect yourself to open it every day and take it, it's so much troublesome. You put it right in front of you at your work desk, right? So it's easy to reach, easy to take and drink. So it's the same concept, availability. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Nick. For the time being, there's no question, I guess. But if there's question, I'll get back to you maybe at the end. If there's question, because sometimes they may take some time for them. To ask question. So thank you so much, Dr. Nick. Very insightful. Very insightful. Some of the nudges that didn't work actually, but we may learn from it. So our next speaker is Dr. IZHAR Mi, Group Managing Director of Sancy Berhad. Apa khabar, Doktor?
Baik, Shahidi. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Dr. IZHAR is someone that I know. He is a very experienced and actively working in the area of public policies since 2010. MPC has engaged him in behavior insight, regulation, productivity measurement, and even information system. When it comes to behavioral insight, Dr. IZHAR has been advising on developing behavioral insight development plans, project supervision, training content, and even leading several BI initiatives. His current research area is the application of BI in patient medication adherence and preventive care. A very experienced person indeed. So today will be a very interesting session, and Dr. IZHAR will be sharing his experiences in implementing BI here in Malaysia. So I guess Dr. IZHAR, you can start and floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Shahidi. Thank you, everyone, distinguished guests, panelists, and ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. Good evening. First of all, thank you, MPC, for inviting me to share some experience. In fact, most of the experience are together with MPC. In fact, I decided to share what MPC experienced as a whole in basically driving the behavioral insight initiative or programs in Malaysia. All right, next slides. Okay, title, sharing experience. Okay, as you know, I think it's been within the opening remarks by the DG MPC. The MPC has been tasked basically or mandated to develop 300 BI competent policymaker by 2025. What it means that there are policymakers out there, they are very much familiar with regulation and many other instruments, but then how can we bring BI into the mainstream of policymaker? I think part of the charter of the MPC was basically how we can develop at least 300 or so BI policymakers in the public sector. I think that's the mandate of within this 12 mission plan. So how it started, MPC basically started multiple programs. Started, of course, obviously with awareness, what would be BI, and subsequently conduct trainings, which is offline and online. In fact, when it started in 2020 and 2021, as you know, is during pandemic, most of the activities are being conducted online. And during that session and even until today, lots of what we call a proof concept BI projects or BI initiative have been carried out by various so-called by various ministry, by various academic institutions, as well as even including industrial people as well as NGO. Next. What I will do, actually, I will share with you two case study or two BI initiative that has been conducted in the last 2 years by MPC, which I'm also actively involved within that. Okay, the first one is what we call it cashless for road transport services, which is JPJ, if you know better. The challenge actually, I think it was when we started the project way back in September 2020, but that's during the pandemic. We had a workshop with the management of our JPJ, and then what they said actually, at that point of time, only 30% of the customer transact or rather consume JPJ services via cashless. Sorry, 30% using cashless. In fact, 70% are still using cash at that point of time. But at the same time, government has issued policies during that time. Basically, they want by December 2022, which is this month, to have to be 100%. At that point, the Road Transport Department has to put on some posters and pay using cashless, debit card, credit card, etc. But still, the take-up rate quite low. So during our discussion, basically our intervention with the JPJ management team. So basically what we said to them, okay, let's explore how best can we do. You have done it, you have put the posters. We know not easy for us to basically manage their people because people come maybe once in a year, once in 3 years to renew license, to pay road tax and etc. So these are public people. It's not like repetitive people that are customers that come every month. So you have done posters and confirmed it's not effective. So after giving a thought, then basically as we decided actually we would like, or rather we recommend to modify context. As you know, when you go to JPJ, there are several counters, right? Several counters for payment. At the counter, they will ask you whether you want to pay via cash or via cashless. So we have selected 6 JPJ branches up north, Kedah, Penang, as well as Imperialist, to as a pilot projects. And basically we said to them, 80% of your counters should be dedicated for cashless, whereas only the balance will have cash and cashless. So let's start the project. Okay, bear in mind, prior to this project, it's only 30% of people pay via cashless. So when we start at that first month, surprisingly, the numbers goes to like 90%, 95% of people willing to pay via cashless, mostly using debit card. And by the next second month and third month, the numbers steadily goes to 99%, even some branches 100%. They didn't force people to basically to pay via cashless because you still have option to pay via cash. But because of, because of you can see the benefit, pay via cashless, make it easier for you to consume the service, for you to do the service, then people will then use their debit card. So within just 2 months, the numbers have gone to 99% of people. In fact, 2 days back, I was in JPJ Kuala Lumpur to renew my license, and I was reminded, Jade, we only accept debit card. But today, what I was saying, actually 100% of JPJ branches basically only accept cashless payment as a result. So from the so-called this case study, which we started about in October 2020, and the pilot study ended in April. And since then, I guess JPJ management has rolled out so-called cashless. But we are not forcing people at the early stage. Okay, we are applying, we have insight, looking at evidence, looking at data, and then we design the intervention. In this case, modifying the context to basically to promote behavioral change of people paying using cashless instead of using cash. Okay, and then as a result, as I said, 99% just within 2 or 3 months. It is, I think, quite a good study. A simple intervention, doesn't cost us a lot of money, just basically change. But of course, the impact, there's a lot of efficiency at the back office of JPJ. You don't need to manage cash, and even in COVID, you don't want to handle physical cash. And then some of the services which are, in this case, currently unnecessary, there's no security that collect the money with high risk going to the bank. All those have been omitted, and of course, since you are transacting using cashless, I think in terms reconciliations of information, I think have improved lots of efficiency of JPJ. Next. Okay, this is a bigger challenge for I think very interesting challenge, but a bigger that will provide big impact to the economy. Again, as what Faisal NARU said earlier, I think these are some of the examples of intervention that we carry out in government. Okay, in care of which MPC have done it in government. So in this case, basically, develop for your permission, for if anyone to construct a building, industrial building, a commercial building, you need to go through local council to apply development licensing, meaning planning approval, building approval, engineering approval for industrial building and many other licenses. In fact, at every stage, there are up to 15 other regulators. Okay, JPS, JKR, right, and the bomber and etc. are involved in that process. All right. So in that typical, in this particular case study, involved Majlis Perhubungan Kulim, and the area is Kulim High Tech. No doubt there's no land issue at this point of time, but a typical construction or rather approval and impact construction until the building complete will take nothing less than 24 months. So, of course, a challenge for Malaysia to bring in investors to the country if we can keep on maintaining that sort of performance. I think Indonesia and when President Jokowi goes up, signing for out of 36 licenses in Jakarta, he cut it down to 12 to speed up the whole thing. The whole idea of who are you efficient? Then we will make you competitive. So we had a discussion. I think we see that, of course, when the first engagement, the focus actually for me to nudge our intervention, basically to nudge the regulators. In this case, their mindset. Okay, no doubt the outcome. Actually, we want a faster construction. We want the outcome. So, the current thinking actually is I'm processing the application. I'm rejecting some application. I have some checklist. This is my checklist. If you don't comply, I reject you again. So after a couple of workshops with other regulators, in that workshop, what I've done actually, I tune up their mindset towards outcome. That's first thing. You need to see the outcome. Let's say if you may be able to allow them or to basically complete the building faster, then what's the outcome? Outcome to the local people, job opportunity. Companies that goes to Kulim High Techs are good companies, good international companies that bring technologies and so on, and pay good, I guess, pay good money for our people out there. I said, you are helping people, you are creating good jobs, and creating good jobs faster. Okay? During COVID, some of the resources has been terminated. So if you can have this, then more people can move from other areas to Kulim. It's good for Kulim. It's good for your local, your township, your district, and so on. That's the first thing. Second thing, I said it contributes to the economy. I showed this Kedah state investment in Kedah at that time, GDP per capita at that time, which is second lowest in Malaysia or third lowest in out of the country. Said, how can you help them? So you can help them a lot. So as a result, by changing that, we have not changed any regulation. We make regulation more agile, and basically we tune up the mindset to first to look at the outcome. Secondly, to play a role as facilitation instead of gatekeeping. All right, become facilitator to investors. So bring investors, make it more transparent, get the investors involved, get the consultant involved, get all the regulators involved in one go, and so on. Surprisingly, as a result of this whole transformation, a typical building, this is a real construction building, the size per globe, initially planned a normal time frame, easily nothing less than 24 months. So the investors, in this case, because of the COVID, they need to produce medical gloves quickly. They say, can we do it in 12 months? As a result of this transformation, through this approach, the operator are able to complete the building in 7 months and begin operation in 9 months. The investors save lots of money. The investors are able to operate quickly and basically can capture the opportunity. So as a result of this so-called in Kulim, made all subsequent projects in the area of Kulim, like ATNS, a very big one, coming with 8 billion investment, has also, instead of 24 months, 34 months, basically been cut down to 12 months. Okay, will work. I think the mindsets of local council has changed a lot, has becoming a facilitator to investment. It's good for country, and as a result, in 2021, Kedah become number 2 country, number 2 states in Malaysia where people put a lot so-called investment in Malaysia. Out of nowhere, Kedah suddenly become in the top 3 tier. Even Kulim, this area alone receive about easily 55 billion investment. I would say among the highest in the country for one area. So it can be done. We don't change any single regulation. I think the regulators also from ministry also come and visited and audited. All regulation are in place. It's just changing their mind, focus them to outcome. That's one. And then what we need to do, I think, start applying agile regulations, and also consultation, facilitation, rather than gatekeeping. I think this is the second case study. Of course, many other case studies that MPC have done in the social, in the besti, drinking water for the school children, and local council enforcement for compound compliance of certain submission, and etc. I think many studies I welcome. I think people, go to MPC, approach MPC, you can learn many things out of that. Next. I don't have many slides, only a few slides. Okay, as a result of we conducting many projects, many so-called proof of concept BI projects in various so-called sectors, social sectors, and then the environment, the economic sectors, and etc. We feel that I think the first challenge that researchers are struggling to carry out a project. Some of them are not sure where to start, where to hit, what to focus, and so on. So MPC eventually come out with one framework called PRIME. The whole idea of framework to make it as a guide for implementing a behavioral insight project. So what MPC have trained quite numbers of consultants, numbers of researchers, or even the policy makers on this PRIME. So with this, actually provide a more so-called step-by-step guide for you to, if you were to follow it, I think you won't miss so-called main key points or main milestone in the project itself. Yeah. So it is a useful framework. I think I would recommend that many people to take opportunity to learn it. I think MPC also have it online and take it so that I think there's some basically important thing it is a practical approach. How can you use behavior insight to eventually resulting in so-called behavioral change to your targets audience for you to produce a better policy. Next. Okay, last but not least, there is as part of parallel initiative, as part of the output that MPC has produced, we call it a micro learning. You can Google it, maya.my, which is MPC's managing the whole site. The costs are free. You can these are some of the costs. The costs are there. Applying behavioral insight in public policy, behavioral insight case studies in prime implementation framework, which I just mentioned just now. All these are available for you. You can go there. The reason why we put it, I think we need a more structured content for people to come, and then you can practice. We welcome all of you basically to work with MPC if you have any proposed project that you want to carry out behavioral insight. So as a result of this content, I think people will have a better understanding of the subject, better understanding how to execute the behavioral insight project. Next. All right, this come to my last slide. I think as many earlier presenters, from OECD, FAISAL, NARU, and I think they more or less the similar conclusion. Government policy makers have begun considering applying behavioral insight. I think you can see the trend in Malaysia. You see the world map of OECD. There's a dot, a Malaysia dot. It was not that in the last survey, but today it is there. You can feel the activities of behavioral insight in the country is there. So experimentation, experimentation is important. It's not a full-scale implementation. I think the keywords here: find and getting evidence, find evidence on the behavioral challenges, behavioral motivation for people or target group to change their behavior. Design your behavioral intervention, carry out experimentation. As I said earlier, whether experimentation is whether return a positive result, negative result, still a lesson learned in the previous panelists. And then, of course, the importance of evidence-based policies. Okay, it's not just gut feeling, but it is an evidence-based. We need to use data, where the data collected. In the case of road transport department, the data is collected from the machine itself, from the JPJ system. Pull out the data and see the transactional data. You don't need to collect data. The transactional data tell that strong evidence, the so-called the percentage of people use cash and cashless. So evidence-based important. If your intervention is effective, then it leads to maybe you need to scale out and then further before it finally become policy. But as I said, just like John Raman earlier says, I think fast-paced, basically just like quick snapshot, design implementation, test it, then you can get a better sense whether it works or not work, then you can always change. But if you launch it a big bang approach, if it collapses, if it doesn't work, then it's going to cost you a lot of unnecessary effort, investment, and etc. I guess with that, that's the end of my presentation. Very short slide, but hopefully give you some insights. I do welcome all of you to approach MPC for better understanding or execute your so-called projects together with MPC. Thank you very much. Back to you, Shahidi.
Thank you, Dr. IZHAR. I'm from KULM, and what you did for KULM is such a wonderful thing, Doctor. Thank you so much. When it comes to the first project, JPJ project, does it seem to be quite manipulative? Is it manipulative, or is it just one of the technique that we can use in terms of nudging others?
I think it's for us. I think we don't see it as a manipulative, because the whole idea is actually about for better. So I call it pro-social, but better outcome for social. It's better. I guess better for people. That's one thing. On the other side, of course, for the government, it's better getting make them more efficient, and remove unnecessary tasks. Like managing cash, managing receipt, and those kind of things. I think the intention is good. I think that towards a better intention and in line with the so-called government policy. Of course, there are ways of changing behavior. I'm just giving information. That's one thing. But also in this case, I think we will modify the context. In this case, the counter is as a context. So we don't foresee this because that doesn't give a negative impact to recipient.
Yeah, and there's also technique called default and coercion, where this is what we do. There's a question from Mr. SAIFUL. Dr. IZHAR, how to ensure sustainability of change as a result from the BI project?
How to ensure sustainability? Of course, I think what you need to do, I think we need to be able, I guess, first to control the thing. When it meaning, for example, in the case of JPJ, in the case of even KULM, we don't just do one project and that's it. Of course, we need to measure how, where basically measure the effectiveness, keep on measuring the effectiveness of that's the main thing. So towards that, we also need to measure KPI of producing so-called the efficiency, producing that so-called the output and service. That's two part of that. So for you to be able, as I said, I think I would send some of our activity goes straight away to nationwide. I think it's very hard for you to manage, and sometimes you not have data to do that. So it's good to start with small. For example, KULM, we started with KULM. Today, Majid Modern Kulai and Johor start getting good investment. They're bringing the investors all the big data centers are going to Kulai, and the construction has gone down from 2 years to 1 year, and people are investors are going. So what I'm saying here, you need to measure. We must be able to make it repeatable. In the case of JPJ now, it's quite straightforward because we are modifying the contact. The contact remains the same. The contact doesn't so-called give back experience to users that pass through the context, then I think that should not be an issue. In the case of BJ, very straightforward. But of course, a more complex situation in the case of KULM, they have multi-dimensional. But of course, we need to do. But ultimately, if you were to ask me what is the most important thing, I would say top-down approach. Get the top to understand the importance of it. That's the starting point, a good starting point.
True,
Yep.
true, true. There's also authority bias when it comes to that, right?
Right.
When it comes to top down,
Yeah.
it's the best
But
way.
Ismail Paul, like Kulim, the YDP has basically embraced it and drive it. So it's not like telling the staff this you must do that, you must do that, and slowly they've got all the other staff are getting to the buy-in, and they want to work in national award and etc.
Yeah, good outcome. Thank you so much, Dr. IZHAR, for the sharing. I guess there will be question later at the end of the session, but I'll introduce the next panelist. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. IZHAR. So our last panelist will be a duo of Dr. SHAHIDA binti MUSA from FAMA and Mr. GANESH KUMAR NADARAJAH from Eden Strategy Institute Malaysia. Hi, welcome.
Apa tan?
I'll give a brief introduction. Yeah, Dr. SHAHIDA is a division director, policy department, strategic planning division in FAMA. She has been in FAMA since 2006, and she has a PhD in horticulture, agribusiness. While Mr. Ganesh Kumar Nadarajah is a very experienced person, the country manager and principal at Eden Strategy Institute in Malaysia. He has proven 33 years track record in senior leadership roles. He has managed businesses and strategies and financial control. I think he has a lot of experience, and they will be sharing, both of the paneling will be sharing their experience in implementing BI to improve service delivery. So the floor is to you guys. Silakan.
Okay. I guess I might restart this particular session. So thank you very much for the invitation. So let me share my slide. Oh, is it okay if the yeah, okay, thank you. All right. So first of all, I would like to say thank you for the MPC to invite FAMA to come in and share our experience in implementing BI to improve our service delivery. Okay, next slide, please. Before that, I would like to introduce a little bit about FAMA. So FAMA basically is a Federal Agriculture Marketing Authority. So we are established since September 1965. So basically, FAMA function is to regulate, regulate and developing the marketing Malaysia agricultural products, including import and export. But as for the time being, we only focus on horticulture produce, floriculture, ornamental product, and recently we already have some amendments of our act whereby we are handling also certain type of livestock products such as a cattle, a domestic fowl, and etc. Okay, next. Okay, first and foremost, why actually FAMA interested in behavioral insight study? When we are being approached by MPC in 2021, by that time it's during a pandemic. So everybody are telling that we need to help smallholders, we need to help all the small farmers, entrepreneurs, especially in the horticulture produce, trading, due to the pandemic issues. They have a lot of problems in terms of marketing their produce. So what happened is, of course, the online business is the best choice at that time. So everybody are promoting to do the online business, doing the e-commerce, and then FAMA are being approached because most of our stakeholders is small farmers and small entrepreneurs. However, it is what from our experience tell us that this particular awareness to be in the e-commerce platform for the smallholders and for farmers actually is a very, I mean, they have a lot of awareness because they can see a lot of what do you call it, e-commerce platform like Shopee, Lazada, and etc. Are very efficient and very effective doing the trading. But unfortunately, they don't have any urge to really go into that particular platform. So FAMA, we would like to understand even though they do have a lot of awareness, but unfortunately they don't have any big urge to come into the platform. So we do a lot of basic study. Actually, we do a lot of interviews, we do a lot of questionnaires, we do a lot of sharing experience with them and get some kind of insight with them. And FAMA also do a lot of intervention. In fact, that we do have our own training e-commerce platform, so-called AgroBazaar Online. And we give a few advantages, such as they didn't pay any enrollment fees. They do have some kinds of free delivery, but yet their participation on the platform is still very low. So in that sense, we have been thinking that to get a better understanding about why and what and how actually e-commerce platform should be, or anything related to online businesses can actually give some kind of impact to the smallholders and small farmers and entrepreneurs, and what can we do as a government agency to help and enhance and encourage them to be in those particular line. So the most important thing, the reason why also FAMA interested in behavioral insight, because we want to see more impact and more outcome of the project. Next. So for that reasons, actually in 2021, FAMA with MPC actually launched one particular study in terms of application e-commerce among the agro-food producers for the fresh produce in Malaysia. So we want to see what is the behavioral factors. So there is three major level or stage that we want to get to know better about the awareness, about the willingness for them to transfer from the offline to online, and can they sustain to those online business. So first of all, it's very surprisingly, actually their awareness is very high. Even though they are smallholders, their awareness is very high about the importance of the e-commerce platforms. And they do have a very high trustworthy into the banking system, because all the payment activities will be using the banking system. So the trustworthy is very good. However, the negative side in terms of the awareness actually depends on the demographic and locality. Most of the area that have the internet accessibility problems, so they a bit reluctant, or they do understand about the importance, but yet their eagerness to be in the online platform is quite low. Secondly is their willingness to change their current business model to the online. So basically, most of our smallholders or most of our farmers, they do have some kind of some sort of like a smartphone and all the merchandise that can help them to do the online business. And they are also understand that if they go into the online business, they can change their model due to the to get a better margin and also reduce their costs. However, it is because of they are dealing with their perishable produce, and most of the transaction during the using the online is direct to the consumer. It's not business to business, more to business to consumer. So means that they are going to get only a small volume of sales in every transaction. So that is also one of the hindering factors. And then third, the last stage, actually we want to see either they will sustain with these changes of the business model. So what we can see is if this particular transaction or transformations, government can maybe I can say do some nudges in terms of the win-win situation, such as a cost of packaging or delivery, they can have more interest to be sustained. However, it is how long it can be sustained in the new model, business model, is very much depends on their scales of business, and also how they are able to do some kind of the cost adjustment of their business model. So this is the first study that we have been done in 2021. So what is the output or what the outcome from this particular study for pharma? So now we are looking into kind of nudges for this particular group of smallholders in terms of the type of packaging, the type of handling material that can make it easier for them then encourage them to be on board in the e-commerce platform. So this is something that we look into it. And then although they get a better margin if they come into the e-commerce, but yet again the easiness, how easy they are going to handle the product, and the volume of product is really means a lot for them, because they have a very little or very small workers that we will deal with all the product. So if they have like offline and online trading platform, normally it will increase their cost, because they might dedicate a specific workers just to handle the online business. So this is something that might be we need to change their mindset, how they can maximize their optimize their costs to handle both offline and online business. Okay, second study. Next slide, please. In 2022, again, pharma with MPC, we would like to see how actually e-commerce e-payments among merchants and consumer for fresh produce in the farmers market. So this is a very interesting study, and then I guess after this, Mr. Ganesh will be sharing about how his study would be, because what pharma want to see is we encourage our small entrepreneurs, especially in Pasar Tani, to use online payment. We already done this for a few, I guess around 2 years, starting for the COVID-19 pandemic, because we want to encourage them to do more cashless. So we do facilitate them in few activities, but yet the takers is quite low. So it's a very interesting to see. It is actually a chicken and egg issue between the merchant and also the consumer. So I guess later on, Mr. Ganesh will be sharing more because this study is still ongoing study. So before I pass the floor to Mr. Ganesh, I would like to share a little bit pictures about what is the what is our Pasar Tani, and what is the difference between our view of our Pasar Tani Kekal and also Pasar Tani normal Pasar Tani. So let me share some pictures before I give the floor to Mr. Ganesh. Okay, this is some of our activities. Okay, this is our Pasar Tani in Shah Alam. Next. Okay, this is a transformation that we did with, from the Pasar Tani under the umbrella, on the canopy that we have our permanent Pasar Tani in few areas. Because we one of the issues in our Pasar Tani, mobile Pasar Tani, is because of it only for certain time and certain area and certain locality, but we want to encourage more people to come into our Pasar Tani because most of the product is come direct from the farmers. So we launched this Pasar Tani Kekal. So this permanent Pasar Tani is all around Malaysia. So we want to encourage people to come in and then to introduce the e-payment activities, so that our farmers and our people can get a more value out of the e-commerce. So I guess I pass the floor to Mr. Ganesh to more sharing about our project. Please, Mr. Ganesh.
Thank you, Dr. Shahida. First of all, let me thank MPC for inviting us for this National Conference on Behavioral Insights. I would also like to thank FAMA for giving us this opportunity to share some of the work in progress that we have worked together in this project during this year. Also like to take this opportunity to thank all the audience for participating in this program and staying with us till the tail end of this program, this event. So can I have the slides, please? Thank you. As Dr. Shahida had mentioned earlier, so this is a program where we are looking at our experience with implementing behavioral insights in terms of how do we improve our service delivery. Before I go into that, maybe I could just spend just 1 minute to introduce my organization. So we are called Eden Strategy Institute. We are Asia's leader in social innovation. We are also specialists in business systems innovation, sustainability and strategies, and experts in behavioral insights and economies. What we do is that we would like to actually help organizations and governments develop strategies and innovations that advance growth for inclusiveness and sustainability. So that's what we do. We are based here in Malaysia, and we have few offices around this region. Now, if I go back to the slides, can I have the next slide, please? So this behavioral insight study was designed to identify behavioral intervention opportunities that we can get from the various pasar tani, both in terms of the retailers and consumers, in terms of how do we accelerate digital payment adoption. We know it's happening. We know that digital adoption is progressively making roots into the society. But what FAMA and Doctor has said earlier, we were looking at opportunities or nudges in terms of how do we accelerate this. And what we did is that we worked together with MPC, who invited us to work with FAMA to see how we could encourage. And we designed this with this purpose in mind. We were looking to identify main gaps and issues and to understand the problems that prevented more prevailing use of e-payments. The second was to identify the current situation and analyze what are the challenges and digital payment adoption which we could deploy at various pasar tani. Now, I would like to bring to your attention that pasar tani, although it seems to be quite generic, but it varied significantly depending on locations and the demographics of that particular location. So it is not really easy to study because each location would have very unique features, which I will probably touch on some of this in my subsequent slides. The third was to develop an effective instruments in data collection. How do we get data now from vast different locations, different demographics, different preference, different types of traders, and how do we then find options to recommend nudging activities that will be fruitful to have its own evolution of accelerating e-payments in these different locations. And finally is to make those recommendations and action plans for our colleagues in FAMA so that they could achieve their goals which they have set for this program. Next slide, please. Now, it was earlier introduced in the earlier programs in terms of the PRIME framework. So Eden, we incorporated the PRIME framework as what MPC wanted us to adopt this framework in our proposed approach. So what we did is that we used this approach, but we broke down the program into 5 key areas. The first one is to understand the current state of assessment and gap analysis. And what we did is that we looked through various data that FAMA was providing us. They had lots of data, and we could use this data and identify types of characteristics that we could rank the various different pasar tanis into by locations or by demographic, so that we will be able to identify different traits in different locations. The second is to actually then do consumer and vendor behavioral research analysis, which we will talk about it later, in specific areas, each observing the vendors separately, looking at the consumer separately. The third was to design an intervention framework and an action plan to then lead to our fourth point, which to prepare an experiment and conduct an experiment and to do an evaluation on the impact of that experiment. And finally is the final recommendations and implementation roadmaps, where we are in the current program. If I can move on to the next slide. So the application, the next one, please. Slide 4, page 4. Yeah, thank you.
So the application behavioral insight when we were operating in the context is that we looked at the behavioral influence factors, and then we look at what are the key, what influence they had on the key drivers and barriers, and in terms of how they would interface with the various different categories of retailers, various different categories of vendors or retailers. So you're looking at consumers differently, and you're looking at various different traders or retailers. It is interesting to note, for example, different traders, depending in terms of whether they were managed by the entrepreneur himself, or if there was an entrepreneur who had different locations, or whether he worked with his family, or whether he had different shopkeepers or people helping him to manage. And their responses were different, because in terms of how they would actually manage that particular trading activity in that location. What we did is that we looked at using both looking at both the traders and the consumers in this particular lens. First, we look at from an individual perspective, both the trader and the consumer. The second, we look at the business environment, the operating environment, the conditions which they were working on, the time frame, the location, the type of consumers they would come in. In other words, the types of environment conditions that would influence or artificially nudge the consumers or the traders to behave in a certain way. And the third is that we looked at social factor in terms of the community, the demographics of that location. Examples, for example, individuals, we look at in terms of the individual's attitude towards the digital payment, the type of background, age, location, in terms of their preference, in terms of what they perceived as e-payment or what they perceive as digital payment. And it's interesting to note that different locations, whether they're in suburban areas or whether they were in rural areas or in urban areas, their perception of what e-payments is or the availability of e-payment to conduct this varied accordingly. In terms of a business environment, we looked at the level of the on-ground support. In fact, for example, the availability of 4G, like we realized that in some locations, the presence of 4G was not consistent across the entire Pasar Tani, and that influenced in terms of how traders and consumers behaved. The third one is social, for example, endorsement for a relevant authority, the persuasion that comes along the way, the type of influence or nudging that has already taken place or is influencing the outcome of how the traders and consumers behave. Based on this, what we did is that we designed 3 surveys. Next slide, please, slide 5. Yeah, we designed 3 surveys to obtain insights from the different stakeholders. And we looked at the 3 different categories of individuals, business environment, and social. And for individuals, we looked at demographics. We looked at profiling the Pasar Tani retailer and their customers. We look at the leverage uses of digital payment options. Personally, they use, whether or not, regardless of whether they use it currently to transact in the Pasar Tani. In the first place, what do they use it currently for? Do they just use touch and go at the toll, or do they transact to do their shopping, groceries? Do they use it for other purposes? And what are the prompting or nudging which encourage them to use it at a Pasar Tani, or what discourages them? In terms of retailers, if they have other entrepreneurs or enterprises, do they use e-payments or type of e-payments or digital payments to transact? Do they do the same in Pasar Tani? Or if there is a difference, what's driving the difference? What is the gaps? What is influencing their gap? And then finally, we look at the level of usage of digital payment options that is currently available in that location, the pervasiveness of that availability of e-payment in that demographic. In terms of business environment, we looked at the type of customer served. For example, in one Pasar Tani, we realized that there was a lot of foreign workers, and the foreign workers usually wanted to transact in cash. And because they transacted in cash, the traders preferred cash payment. And because most of the transactions were done by cash, it kind of also created an environment where even other consumers who had the option of using e-payment also begin to actually just transact on cash. We also looked at the preferred mode of transaction by customers and suppliers in their own areas where they transact, that is aside from Tani. And then we also look at the frequency of business at selected location. For example, an entrepreneur that is only having one location once a week tends to focus a lot more preferences for cash payment, while if it's an entrepreneur that's having several locations and of Pasar Tani, or in fact transacting in other locations of business, he tends to use rely on e-payments, or is more preference to have more payments using e-payment, because it allows him to actually manage his cash and business more effectively and efficiently. And the third in that type of a lens that's social, we looked at the level of support of engagement with the retailers to onboard cashless transactions, the types of incentives they would have to motivate them. For example, in some locations, people were especially in the urban areas, they were very focused in terms of using e-payment whenever, because of earning loyalty points or bonus points. So there is a preference. While there was certain demographics of age that didn't pay so much attention on that and had less preference using e-payments because they're more of using cash and not very comfortable using digital payment. So based on this description, and with which we engaged together with MPC, and also our pre-groundwork that we did on the various survey sites that we did, we then developed a questionnaire, and then the types of questionnaire also varied. For example, for vendors, if it's a worker, we had a specific questionnaire for them. If it's a co-business owner, we had a different question for them. And if it's a owner operated stall or site, then we had a different question for them. Likewise for a consumer, we had different categories, so that to ensure that we be able to find out the behavioral attributes before we do the analysis on the output. On my next slide here, what we like to show you is that the initial survey found that despite cash being dominant, there is a very strong willingness to adopt e-payments both from retailers and customers. This is based upon our on-site research that the Eden team did, together with lots of support from MPC and FAMA that provided lots of ground support. And the focus was that for consumers, the urbanites obviously were more open to e-payments. And when we say urbanites more open to e-payments, we are looking at a specific generation of users or consumers. Whilst the older consumers, even if they're located in urbanites, had some slight reluctance because of non-familiarity of e-payment applications. We also look at non-urban customers' preference for cash because for security reasons. We also looked at key drivers for non-urban consumers to include on-the-ground support and guidance, and what were the drivers for urbanites for greater acceptance of e-payment in Pasar Tani site. On the retailers, one of the things that we found is that the main challenges include barriers in infrastructure and cognitive overload, because they would rather just pick up the cash and to load the cash, as opposed to teach or to help consumers who sometimes struggle with the e-payment, because speed is in essence for them to transact. If not, you would lose your consumer and he might walk to the next stall. So for them, speed is very, very important. So their willingness to adopt e-payments was high, but when the consumers took too long to open up their phone or had difficulties to scan the QR code, then they were willing to just forego that benefit of using e-payments and then quickly just use cash, so that they can then serve the customer and lock in the sales, and quite understandably, as opposed to potentially lose that customer. One of the key drivers that we found is that our education on the ground and endorsement from relevant authorities plays a significant role in supporting nudging from them. And they felt that when they saw FAMA and MPC people in the ground encouraging the use of e-payment, the preference for them was that they felt that they have opened. There's a very high willingness for them to use, but they wanted the support actually to focus on consumers to help them to do e-payment, and say that, you know, we are okay, we are ready. In fact, it's better for them for consumers to use e-payment. We also looked at the types of e-payments in terms of which consumers preferred, whether they preferred QR code or whether they preferred touch and go or some kind of a card wave payment scheme or using a mobile application. And we have some data, in fact, some interesting data in terms of where the preference was and in terms of whether there was a difference between urbanites compared to rural consumers. Can we move on to the next slide? So one of the key things was that in our understanding the operating context was that for us then to tailor an intervention framework at a selected pasar tani, we wanted to ensure that we could design an experiment on a specific requirement that we have agreed together with FAMA, and that we looked at two themes, one the drivers and the second the barriers. There are four aspects on behavioral observation that we wanted the experiment to focus on, and let me run through this very quickly. I'm conscious of the time. The first is to see are there underlying willingness for customers to respond to e-payment offerings. The second is that whether what are the key drivers for customers as if more traders offered e-payment option. The barriers was that how do we then ease of the current practice to supply chain consideration in terms of availability of e-payment modes, and also the strong preference for cash for both traders and customers in rural areas and in some urban locations. The relevant BI theories that we looked at is that we use definitely certain specific BI theories in terms of the choice architecture, also in terms of the availability bias and the salience. We also looked at status quo bias and the present bias itself in the particular location. And then we looked at the types of behavior BI interventions that we could in terms of nudging, and also what are the other non-nudging hard interventions which we'll ignore but identify too. Next slide. Now, based on this, we looked at the types of nudging, and what we decided together with our client, MPC and FAMA, was that we looked at these three key areas. We decided that we recommended and we concluded that the three most focused nudging that we will use in our experiment is the just-in-time prompts, the visual cues, and the social norms, in terms of how we could actually provide some form of peer pressure for consumers to move towards adopting e-payments, and also for traders to nudge consumers to use e-payment. The rationale is to reduce the interference of trading activity and ease of replicating for FAMA in post-experiment, because we realized that based on our observation and feedback from the retailers or vendors was that they were willing to support, they're willing to adopt, they were willing to support this program by the authorities, but they were also at the same time genuinely concerned is that this could potentially impact their revenues or their earnings, understandably. And obviously, FAMA was very quick to assure them, and we were there on site to assure them that this is to actually facilitate greater response, get higher stickiness, it's safer for them. At the same time, is to show that the consumers always will have the ability to transact at their own preference choice, and this nudging, it is done in a way that would not harm the potential sale the retailer would benefit from. My final two slides is that the two recommended interventions by Eden was the first is the verbal cues, which we designed specifically for the traders to engage with the consumer before receiving the goods, to encourage e-payment. The desired effect was to time the notification to indicate the preference for e-payment, and this type of nudging is what we call just-in-time prompt. The second was a more prominent display of QR code, because we felt that from our observation and research, although a lot of the traders valued and preferred QR code or e-payments, they didn't particularly had used signs to actually display the QR code, as they were located in less obvious areas. They were not easily accessible to consumers. It was not in sight of payment when the cash was transacted. It was located at different locations. So we actually created examples. We went through a mini training on site with the chosen traders for the experiment to display, demonstrate, and actually convince them as to why this has to be located this way, so that it would benefit them, it would benefit their types of business which they want to do, and how it would provide prompting back to the verbal cues that would encourage by the trader. We had some specific selection criteria that we worked very closely with FAMA to ensure that we had a control group. We had traders that had preference for e-payment, and some traders that were neutral, no strong preference, so that we ensured that the experiment would have a very good results in terms of ensuring that the post-experiment program would have the capacity for FAMA to decide in terms of the type of action plans they would want to carry out, depending on terms of the location, type of consumers, and type of traders. My final slide is this, which is the next slide. What we found, and this is the preliminary analysis, as we are currently finalizing the analysis to discuss with FAMA. So, but based on the preliminary analysis, what we found is that retailers were obviously very open to adopting e-payments, but their preference to execute the e-payment always resulted in the hands of customer preference. In fact, none of the trader wanted to use e-payment as the only sole choice of payment. Neither we recommended them, but we also inquired whether they would just use e-payment as the sole execution for payment. And obviously, their preference has always been let the customer decide. The second is that the urbanites and young customers were more open to use e-payments. Obviously, it's faster, it's quicker, it's safe, it's detailed, transacted, and so on and so forth. And plus, the younger generations were looking for the loyalty points. They were looking for the freebies that come with using e-payments, depending on type of vendor they use. And we also quick to add that we use a QR code that allowed the consumers not to be tied down to any particular brand or e-channel or any specific type of brand of e-payment. In other words, the consumer had always the choice of utilizing their own preferred type of e-payment channel. The elderly customers, what we found is that they required on-the-ground support. And what we found is that with the right support, with a bit of encouragement and help, they were willing to try. Some of them were happy with the ease of usage, but the reluctance was still high because they had great difficulty in using the latest gadgets, and especially those in the more senior age of our consumers. Had a bit of reluctance to adopt, to open up their online banking, to link it up to their e-payment, because they didn't feel comfortable. They have not done it. They didn't have the experience or trust to do that, but they were willing to consider progressively. And so we have some recommendations on that front. The third one is that we found that the key driver for non-urban consumers is to have on-the-ground support and guidance, so that the level of trust, the level of understanding, and the level of ease of use can be increased over time, because although their preference was there, the choice was not the first option because of lack of knowledge and experience. From the retailer side, which is good news, is that we found that retailers were receptive to being nudged. There was a very high willingness for them to work and cooperate with FAMA. They were willing to adopt e-payments because a lot of them use e-payment to settle their own payments with their vendors, use e-payment to pay off for their transport costs, their workers, their own suppliers, and also obviously from a sense of security. and at the same time, this facilitates for them in terms of managing their own accounts and also in terms of managing their relationship with traders and also with authorities. Retailers with multiple locations also preferred e-payments, has allowed them to track transactions easier. So largely we found that most retailers that were open to e-payments, but with a condition that the consumers always had the final choice of their mode of payment. And here's where we have paused, and we are in the final stages of doing our final recommendations for FAMA, for them to debate and discuss in terms of the choices that they are willing to work together with us to make the next steps to encourage progressive increased use of e-payment in Pasar Tani. Thank you, and I think that concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ganesh. A wonderful implementation of behavioral insight and even prime framework. You can see, the implementation is like spot on. And thank you, Dr. Shahida, for the sharing and for.
Sorry, I didn't see the chat group. I didn't see the chat messages.
Yeah, because basically we've gone past through our time limit. And I got a message from one of the viewers who said that there's cut off, so they are not able to watch it anymore. Not sure which medium is that, but I guess we have to end the session in a way. But there's one question that I found to be very interesting. Maybe Mr. Ganesh or Dr. IZHAR can answer this. The question is, when we pick up an issue in an organization, panelists, any panelists that are interested to answer this question, because I think this is a wonderful question. When we pick up an issue in an organization, how do we translate the issue so that it represents a behavioral metrics? For example, high complaint on waste collection. Is this an operational or business metric? How do we measure behavioral issue here? I'll give any panel 2 to 3 minutes to answer this. Yeah. Yeah, Mr. Ganesh or Dr. IZHAR can answer. How do we translate the issue to represent a behavioral metrics?
Of course, whenever there is an issue, I think you got to first, identify the issue, and then you got to go down and, of course, start identifying what are the root cause of the issue. Is it because of human person? Is it because, for example, in the case of, for example, accessibility? Is it structural? Is it because there's so many possible causes of that? So if it is involved human, then there's opportunity for us to apply this behavioral insight, behavioral intervention to nudge the person towards that. That's my short answer. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Ganesh or Mr. Nick, any? How do we identify this as a behavioral issues problem?
I think Doctor answered it quite appropriately. I think end of the day, it boils down in terms of going to the root of what precipitated the deviance, and then developing the right level of understanding of the behavioral attributes. And I think regardless of in terms of which frame that you want to diagnose the issue, it always results back to in terms of how you want to look at both improving the processes and the software and hardware of that creates the environment. If you look at the three lenses of social, environment, and individual, then you respond appropriately, because there always will be supporting ways of ultimately nudging the right behavior.
Okay, so I guess that is yeah.
Mr. Shahidi, just want to add in a bit more in the preference of the implementer like FAMA. Normally, we decide that it's a behavioral problems if once we already do some kind of interventions, so like something in terms of the Maybe we give them some kind of incentive, initiative, or something like that, but it won't work or it won't lasting. Then definitely we will see behavioral is one of the key issues here.
All right, wonderful. Maybe Mr. Nick, just some last few words.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone has mentioned just now, and so really identifying the problem with multiple methods that are available, like I think mentioned by Mr. Ganesh just now, using survey forms. I felt that using survey forms with different actors is very, very interesting and effective to really diagnose the problem at every angle. And also probably the use of qualitative interviews where you go on the level, the ground level, and find out in further detail, in depth, what is the real problem, and then really segregate it into the different core components like environment, social, and individual. You can come up with the different matrices, and then you can start thinking how you implement the interventions. I would definitely, of course, we would start off with low-hanging fruits, like which are the ones which are most easy to implement, lowest cost, and we see what happens. And if it still doesn't work, then we go for the more difficult ones, and yeah, keep reassessing and stuff.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I think
Mr.
the idea
Saiful?
is always to keep it simple and easy. Yeah. Great, Najib.
Mr. Saiful, any final words?
I think we should acknowledge also that it's important to use some behavior change theory or models or framework in terms of understanding a certain behavior. For example, in IHBR, so we pretty much use theories or behavior change component as a guide to understand why certain behaviors occurs, what are possible intervention that we could intervene, and so on. So in conclusion, I think the use of behavior change theory or framework, I think is important in order to develop a sense of more understanding on the particular behavior issue.
All right. Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Saiful. So to conclude, I would say it is not impossible to adopt BI. Maybe it's challenging at first, but it is interesting nonetheless. Yeah. So and again, to recap what our Secretary General said just now, our Secretary General of MITI and even our Secretary General mentioned one Ministry One BI project. This is something that we hope can spark the interest, and we can start implementing BI in every agencies or every ministry as well. And MPC will help in terms of implementing. They have the guideline and they have the prime framework. So I guess that's it from us. Thank you so much to all the panelists. Wonderful discussion. I'm hoping for a longer period of time. Maybe we can have, for everyone a more suitable, not just 15 minutes, but 1 hour session from everyone. So again, thank you so much to all the panelists. I think until we meet again someday. So I'll pass the floor back to Mr. Syed Munawar. Thank you so much and have a pleasant day. Yeah.
Thank you, Shahidi. Please forgive the thunderstorm. It's raining cats and dogs over here in Kuala Lumpur. We are now at the end of our conference. Before we adjourn, I would like to remind participants to fill in the survey forms so that this will entitle you for the e-certificate of attendance. And also, you can, the BI guideline handbook is now available for free download. Check our link at MPC site, and also you can download via the link shared throughout the session since 2 o'clock. You'll find it on Facebook as well as on this platform. On behalf of the organizer, I'd like to thank our distinguished guests and speakers, and last but not least, all participants who are here on this event platform, as well as those who are watching us via our social media account. With that, we wrap up our fabulous episode of BI National Conference. I hope to see you all again in the coming events and also in the next year's BI event. Until then, take care and have a splendid days ahead. Syed Munawar signing off. Assalamualaikum and thank you.
Behavioral insights, understanding and nudging behavior towards better policy and public administration. Experts have been studying a novel policy approach of nudging consumers' behavior, helping people making better choices for themselves and the public at large. For more than 10 years, This crossbreed of psychology, social science and cognitive approach of policy administration had run through rigorous empirically tested research. It has now been further developed and serves as a way to nudge the public into making better decisions. Behavioral insights guidelines aimed at helping regulators to use behavioral insights tools, approaching issues, gauging need and introducing measures for policy intervention. Facilitating government at all levels, national, state and local, alike, on various issues ranging from regulation, consumption, conservation, environment and resource allocation. Behavioral Insights Guideline and Behavioral Insights Handbook for Regulators helps the nation to better understand the need of the citizen while nudging the country to higher productivity and a better future.